Committee Room 29. Sound.
10:03 start, okay.
Yep.
You confirmed open now.
Okay, thank you, members, and you're all very welcome this morning to our meeting here of the Committee for Communities. We have a quorum and I call the meeting to order, and I remind anyone in the public gallery there that mobile phones must be turned off. Tablet devices can be used through a Wi-Fi connection and all devices should be muted, please. Password details are available in the gallery for anyone wanting to connect to the Assembly's Wi-Fi network, and no recordings or photographs may be taken. Can I remind members about the protocols regarding the use of electronic devices? Please switch all mobile devices to airplane mode and activate your Wi-Fi connection. Please also use tablets discreetly in a way which does not interfere with proceedings, and be aware of cameras and the sensitivity of the microphones here in the room. Finally, I would remind members of your responsibility to declare any interest in any of the items under discussion today. Does any member of any interest in particular wish to declare today? Andy?
Charity Trustee, Chair.
Yeah. Anyone else? I'm also a charity trustee.
I'm also a charity trustee.
Yeah. Thank you, members. Moving on then to apologies. Clerk, do you have any apologies?
Lisa McHugh, Kelly Armstrong, Shannon Mulholland, Morris Bradley.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Members, chairperson's business then. I would like members to acknowledge, particularly with this week being Homelessness Awareness Week, the debate that many of you took part in on plenary on Monday. It was good to see the motion gain so much cross-party support, and it was also good to hear the Minister's announcement of an additional 6.7 million split between the Housing Executive to help prevent the risk of homelessness service closures, and the Voluntary and Community Support Services receiving 3.7 million working on the ground, and very important work which they all do. I'm sure you will agree, members, this is very welcome funding at this time. I would like a wee bit more information on how the Housing Executive intends to use the specific additional funding, and would seek your agreement that we write to the Housing Executive to ask for that. Are members agreed?
Agreed.
Yeah,
Agreed.
Thank you. And just staying on the topic of homelessness, I will remind members that we will hear directly from both First Housing and the North West Methodist Mission about their essential support work at our meeting next week in Derry, and encourage you all to attend, and that is a focus on homelessness in that meeting as well. So just remind members of that.
Chair, just on the extra funding, yes, you're right, it is welcome, but my concern really is that this will just be swallowed up into the emergency temporary housing sticking plaster response that has been happening. It is absorbing huge levels of public money that could be invested in new property or new housing stock, or certainly putting derelict property back into use again to actually alleviate housing pressures and deal with the homelessness crisis. I just fear that given the huge demand for housing, particularly this time of year, that 6 million is be soaked up into this, and really it doesn't resolve any problem whatsoever. We drift along into the same chaotic state that we're in.
Yeah.
It's just we really need the department really need to get into solution mode to deal with the actual root cause here, as opposed to just responding and sticking a plaster over it, so that next year we need the same level of money again and actually haven't helped anybody along the course. That's my concern in relation to it. It is welcome, any money is welcome, but it depends on how it's going to be used, I suppose.
So letter to include that
Yeah.
last, how it's going to fit into that overall preventative work as well as the reactive, and both important. I agree, absolutely important. Okay, members, thank you for that. Moving on then to the draft minutes, which are at page 6 of your meeting pack. Are members content to agree the minutes of 20th November as drafted?
Agreed.
Thank you, members. Matters arising then, members. So you've been provided with a summary table of matters arising at page 18. I'll go through those replies in groups, just take them in sort of blocks so that we can keep a clear focus on which items we're referring to. So if we just ask members to consider that. So I'll go through the particular blocks of them and ask members if there's any issues within those that they wish to highlight. So I'll start off with items 4.2 to 4.6. Could members indicate if there's anything within those matters arising that they wish to flag up? Yes, Deputy.
The first one in relation to the 4.2, and just to declare an interest whereby I would have been a charity commission helper group at the time, and also I managed a charity and supported numerous charities, and we're all well aware of the McKee and others' decision. So I'm just conscious of, and the chaos that it did take, where organisations then didn't send in their annual reports, etc., to the Charity Commission, etc. I just don't understand why it hasn't progressed. So I would love to just write to the department to check out what are the barriers for it to be expedited in relation to the delegation. The scheme of delegation, yeah.
Members agreed.
Members agreed with that? Yeah, thank you. One that I did want to flag up was the draft EQIA 4.3 there on the social winter fuel payment regulations. Just to reiterate that that was a particularly cruel and callous decision by the Labour government, and it will affect thousands of pensioners this winter. The policy will have a negative impact on older people, and it is in breach of obligations, to that cohort of people. It is very concerning that EQA is only taking place now, months after the decision was implemented. But even in that scenario, I would encourage and implore people to respond to the consultation, so the impact is clearly recorded, even belatedly as it is in this case. I just want to flag that and ask people to respond to the consultation that is coming forward. Any other member there from 4.2 to 4.6 members? Go ahead, Brian.
Yep, just to comment also on the winter fuel payment. I understand in terms of the payment that the Minister brought forward, the £100 payment for those who won't be receiving the main winter fuel payment. Understand that the figures, the number of households who benefit in Northern Ireland is over 174,000. And that's the current estimate. So again, that just indicates the scale of those who'll be benefiting from that intervention.
The total was 17 million, wasn't it, Chair, that was awarded? So the Minister requested 17 million and was awarded 17 million, isn't that correct?
I would presume it was a business case. I know it was certainly allocated by the Finance Minister for 17 million. I'm not clear about.
Have finance officials coming in. So
Yeah, we could ask.
Yeah, it's not always the case we get what we ask for, is it? We probably could ask for more.
Yeah. And it would be worth asking. It may have been the case that it was a broad recognition across the executive. This was so impactful that it needed to be addressed. Ciara?
I just want to note as well, in the report, I think the EQIA, it's obviously too little too late in the sense, but I can understand the delay in it. But I think the key things for me, back in September 22, they estimated that there was approximately over 26,000 potentially not receiving pension credit who may be entitled to it. So that first and foremost is quite an alarming figure. And then likewise, and I do welcome obviously the work through Make the Call and the department and the officials have done, where over the last quarter there was over 3,000 additional people that applied. But what's even more concerning to me, and that's why it's critically important regarding particularly now coming into the winter period, how we support our most vulnerable, was the figures whereby of those that, although now probably welcome the £100, it's very, very much welcome, over 14,000 of the single pensioners are just over that limit by £50. Over 31,000 single pensioners are £100 or less over the qualifying limit. So I just found that, and over 14,000 couples are £100 or less over the limit. So that just shows you the scale and the number of people that will be struggling this winter and need as much support as they can. So it was really good to get that detail of information. It gives us a clear idea of the huge number of people that did lose out. And it's quite shameful of what the British government have done.
Yeah, members agreed and content with that. Before we move on, I just want to acknowledge the Sport NI response on the Paralympic athletes and how those will be supported, and they have indicated that they are looking at ways to do that and at ways to acknowledge the hard work and dedication of Paralympic athletes, and they will attend or are offering to attend a future committee meeting to brief members in these matters, and I think that is welcome, and I would certainly support seeing them in due course to see how that work is progressing. I think it's important. element, particularly in
Can I just
disability.
jump back to the winter fuel payment?
Yep.
And perhaps I may have missed it, our colleagues have seen it, but the Minister had highlighted that the fuel poverty strategy consultation would be imminent, but I haven't seen anything. I think he said in the Chamber last week within days in recognition of Fuel Poverty Awareness Day. I'm just wondering if we could maybe write to him to see where that is and maybe also consider a briefing from officials, because obviously whilst the £100 payment is helpful to those households, unless we actually support them to lift them out of fuel poverty, where that is the case, then it's just going to be a perpetual cycle of challenges.
Yeah. Members agreed we write on that in that term?
Agreed, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, members. Moving on then to items 4.7 to 4.11. Do members have anything that they wish to flag up there? 4.7 to 4.11. Yeah, go ahead.
The key one for me, and obviously, you know, I've reiterated on numerous occasions, is the affordable warrant scheme, and subsequently, even given the want of fuel payment, it's even more critically important regarding the affordable warrant scheme. And there is a huge number requesting support, and then there is also a huge number that are eligible for support. And likewise, we have a huge number sitting waiting, either to get a technical inspection to follow through, or they have received a technical inspection and they're waiting approval of funding. And I know through my office, I have ones that have gone through the process are now waiting just to hear if there's money available. And I know it is a quite limited budget at this moment in time, so it's just to reiterate the importance of the affordable warrant scheme, and it's very much key, particularly because it is our more vulnerable and older people that are living in poor thermal efficiency homes and really need support, and particularly private tenants that I'm aware of and homeowners that are really keen to access some kind of repair grant to support them and make their homes more thermal efficient. So if there's any way the Minister, with any resources that he has, in my opinion, it's critical that he invests in the affordable warrant scheme. And I know there's a review over the next year and a half, but it's in the here and now. And I'd like to know probably what is the prediction given the current budget that we have. And I know it's difficult because you don't know what the cost is going to be for every individual household, but roughly, are they going to be able to cater for those that are currently in the system at this moment in time that are awaiting budget approval? Will there be a deficit by the end of this financial year, given that there was quite a limited budget this year of the 2 million for new applications? So it's really key to see, will we have a number of people that will not be able to access the grant, even though they're eligible for it in this financial year?
Yeah. Members agreed?
Yeah, I think that's an important point. Quite a number of my constituents have benefited from this scheme. It has been vitally important for them. But again, yes, we have to resolve some of the issues that exist in the current housing stock and to assist those actually who cannot afford to put in new boilers or whatever. But the existing new housing stock, or the new housing stock that has been developed, is actually at a lesser standard in terms of efficiency compared to other parts of this island, particularly in the south. And you know, simple things around treble glazing windows and different means of heating our homes as opposed to gas or oil, you know, heat pumps and stuff like that need to be explored. So there's things that we could be doing better here, and we're constantly in catch-up mode. So particularly around efficiency of our homes. But in Strabane, for instance, we're fortunate, thank God, that we're getting about 500 or 600 houses built presently across the area, which has been badly needed. It'll resolve many issues in relation to the housing stock or waiting lists. But those houses really, as they've been built, should be at a higher standard in terms of efficiency. And when I look at what's happening across parts of the south in terms of the standard of housing, and indeed parts of the UK, they're at a higher standard, particularly, you know, as I said, treble glazing, etc.
And we did, now just to remind members, we did rate last week in relation to that. It may have covered issues, I'll just check with the clerk, it may have covered, but the concerns are well noted. But clerk, can you just... I
can just read it out. So we agreed last week to write about what the department considers to be an appropriate baseline for EPCs if the department intends to bring forward a decarbonisation strategy. So all the housing items were clumped in one letter. In regards to affordable warmth, does the department track the reasons for ineligible applications? Information on why applicants do not meet the eligibility threshold for the scheme? The budget for the affordable warmth scheme post-October? Whether this budget will meet the demand for those that are eligible for the grant? And whether the department has considered other investment to alleviate fuel poverty by retrofitting homes. So
It's
that
there.
has just gone.
That's
Yeah.
grand.
So we would need to allow a couple of weeks just for that response to
Yeah.
come back. Does that answer everything then?
It helps. The only thing that I would add when it does come back is how does the baseline around the EPCs compared with other jurisdictions? Because I do think we're at a lesser level.
That's out for consultation
Yeah.
now at this moment in time. And I think we discussed that last week on the back of the private rented sector conference and the initial department consultation, whereby what would be their view or in their opinion would be the minimum efficiency rating that we should be looking at, because there was obviously discussion and we did raise it at the NI Energy Efficiency All Party Group, and they recommended minimum of C. But we wanted to get the department's
Waiting
opinion
for
on
that
that.
to come back.
So
Okay, well let's get that back, and then we can decide. Clearly, an issue that's going to remain on our radar in that sense. Okay, I just wanted to draw attention to 4.9 there on the disability strategy update. Glaring lack of detail, I have to say, around that issue. I did attend a very interesting, a very useful event in City Hall on Tuesday, given it's Disability Awareness Week. A lot of disability activists there. A lot of it was hosted by the Equality Commission, the event. But I think it really would be important now that the department gives us a timeline. I mean, that just to get some idea. There's simply no idea, and it come up repeatedly at that meeting about when can we expect to see a strategy. So, would members agree that we write and seek a timeline from department, a commitment to a timeline on that? Yeah. Thank you, members. Anything else from 4.7 to 4.11?
I suppose just the glaring one, 4. Are you at 4.12? Did you?
Not yet. I'm going
No,
there next.
right. That's.
I'm going there now. So I am then moving forward then to items 4.12 to 4.14, final items on matters arising. So members focus on those. 4.12, Deputy Chair.
In relation to that, obviously, we welcome that the Minister is going to progress a paper to the Executive Committee. I was just in reading the paper, particularly page 101, section 2, welfare mitigation's legislative position, if deemed appropriate. I would like to know, what is it deemed appropriate to legislate to progress the welfare mitigations? Has the department brought that proposal forward to the Executive Committee, that it's deemed appropriate to legislate?
And are you seeking clarity on
I
that?
would just like to see clarity on that. Yeah.
Okay.
It was just, when I was reading it, it just stood out, if deemed appropriate. I would like to know, does the department and the Minister, and what they're presenting to the Executive, do they deem it's appropriate that needs to be legislated for? And then just, if I could,
Yeah, go ahead.
just with regards
So
to
let me-
4.13.
Members agreed with that? Did we seek clarity on that?
I'm not totally clear, because I presume the existing mitigations, through the chair, didn't require legislation. It was just a departmental decision, or the executive as a whole. So is he not just saying, if legislation is required, that he wants to make sure that that it's brought forward within sufficient time? But I've no difficulty with the question, but that's my reading of it, that actual legislation may or may not. It might just be a departmental and executive decision is required. You know,
My understanding would be, I'm open to be corrected in this, but my understanding is the legislation expires at the end, and that's where that's where that cliff edge comes in, because there was a sunset clause or whatever, and it needs renewed in legislation. That would be my
in
understanding.
terms of the benefit cap.
Yeah.
Right.
And probably other mitigations, but the benefit cap certainly is included. I know Deirdre Hargey, for example, had moved on what was known as the bedroom tax.
Yes.
But the benefit cap certainly hadn't been in that sense, so there is a legislative requirement,
Okay.
I believe, Brian.
Okay. So we'll
It's
ask
more the
the
cliff edge
question.
and the timeline,
Yeah.
the detail of the legislation that you wanted to run on, but it'll obviously the timeline will have to be legislated for within the existing legislation. So that's where, if deemed appropriate. So I'd like to know, does the department and the minister, and bringing it forward to the executive, that they deem that it's appropriate?
Okay.
Andy wants to come in.
Andy, go
Yeah,
ahead.
Chair, just looking at Hansard, I think that you had asked a week ago the Minister about the legislation coming forward, and I think in response to yourself he had said that he had hoped to table the legislation in a matter of weeks. The information will be with the executive, I hope, in the coming hours, and the executive will decide in due course. Obviously, but he believed there was a consensus on that with executive colleagues, and he'll come back very soon with recommendations.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think it's a question I've waited to see in the detail. The
So
detail
maybe a timing of when this was written?
Yeah, it could be. That was obviously you had asked the question as a supplementary,
that's
and
why
I remember you asking it and him coming back, and that was when he confirmed that he would be bringing forward legislation.
Yeah, that's why. And then reading that last night, where if deemed appropriate, that kind of raised my alarm bells.
It was last Tuesday that.
Probably a development. I think there's no harm in seeking the clarity
Yeah.
anyway, and obviously we're hopeful that other measures are continuing apace on it as well.
Yep.
Okay, thank you, members. Anything else then in that final section, 412 to 414? Members content? Okay. Okay, thanks, members. So members otherwise content with the memo as and the matters arising as noted in the memo. Correspondence then at item 5, members. We have a number of items there of correspondence at page 113, and there's a tabled correspondence memo at page 3 of your tabled papers. Do members have any comments on any particular item of correspondence, or are they content to agree the suggested next steps as outlined in the memo? Members, anything there that members wish to raise? I noted there was one in 5.5, a letter to from the co-design group around the Irish language strategy. I think it's in the memo to note, but I think we should actually write to the department again. Obviously, this is something that's taken quite a while to deliver, and there's a long time. So if members are agreed, I think we'll write and ask for an update for committee, as well as I know the Conroy and Gaeilge or the co-design group are writing. But our committee content, we seek an update from the minister.
Yep.
Yeah. Go ahead, Ciara.
Particular one I want to draw out is 5.4, and that's the CRISP. It's obviously our supporting people organisations who do such critical work, supporting our most vulnerable, particularly those that find themselves homeless. Obviously the survey results are presented and they're quite stark in relation to the impact in relation to the NIC, and then the 6.7% increase in the living wage. Clearly it's set out with just over a quarter of organisations responding to that survey, particularly of the 80 plus organisations that provide that support, with a cohort of 20 organisations replying, over 2 million deficit. So there's going to be a huge deficit, and these organisations are going to be at a cliff edge on the 31st of March. They have recommended or wanted to encourage the Minister, obviously, to write to the British Treasury, particularly with the potential of an exemption regarding the national insurance for charitable organisations. And likewise then, obviously, they're calling for that additional investment. And just to add to that, and I know this letter's come in, but I'm conscious I've been out with a range of voluntary and community organisations, neighbour renewal organisations, so they're all in the same boat. And there is real heightened concern now, moving into the new year. Will they be able to survive post 31st of March? So I would be keen to urge the Minister to press the British Treasury in relation to any exemptions for charitable organisations regarding the national insurance. And then likewise, I would like to ask what the department has done. Have they profiled what will be the impact given the current grants that are provided to our community and voluntary sector organisations, likewise to the likes of supporting people through the housing executive? What is the impact, and has that request gone in? Because I think the scale is quite big, and just given proposed budgets and indicators, it doesn't seem to be profiled within any budget going forward. So that's kind of two things. Has the department maybe wrote to the British Treasury on the back of the CRISP report? Because I know it was sent to the Minister and CC to all of us. So has any movement been done on that request? But then likewise, what has the department done an analysis of what the impact could be financially moving forward for the CMV sector and what requests have gone in to the Department of Finance and the Executive on this.
Members content? Thank you. Members, just actually to tag back there to 5.5 again, that co-design strategy, actually the co-design group had also requested to meet with the Minister to discuss how they could progress those matters. So I think it would be valid for us to encourage the Minister to do that he should meet with that group. They're clearly a group that has invested a lot of their time into working on the strategy and assisting with that. So if members are content with that. Thank you. Anything else then, the correspondence, members?
No, I see the private members bill coming forward in relation to the CRPD, which is an important piece of legislation. I just fear that it's not strong enough in its wording, but that's for the private member, I suppose. I would like to see something much more adequate in terms of properly updated legislation, as opposed to giving due regard. It's just a bit toothless, but I'll raise it with them.
Yeah, and it will come to committee in due course, I'm sure as well.
It needs to be stronger.
Do you want to seek a briefing from the member or wait until the
Probably too early yet, is
consultation?
it?
We'll wait for him to seek.
Post-consultation.
Yeah, we'll wait for him to seek. Just let him get his. Okay, anything else then, members? Correspondence, or are members otherwise content to agree? Correspondence as outlined in the memo. Yep.
Agreed, yeah.
Thank you. Okay, members, moving on then, we have a number of SRs this morning to address. So agenda item 6 there is SR 2024/198, the State Pensions Debits and Credits Revaluation Order NI 2024, and it's on page 272. So we considered the SL1 for this rule at our meeting on the 7th of November, when we were content for the Department to proceed with making the rule. Do members have any objection to the rule? No. Therefore, can I ask members that the Committee for Communities has considered SR 2024 number 198, the State Pension Debits and Credits Revaluation Order NI 2024, and has no objection to the rule. Are members agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Agenda item 7, members, SR 2024/199, the State Pension Revaluation for Transitional Pensions Order NI 2024, and that's at page 281. So members, we considered the SL1 for this rule also at our meeting on the 7th of November, when we were content for the Department to proceed with making the rule. Do members have any objection to the rule?
No.
No. Therefore, can I ask that the Committee for Communities has considered SR 2024/199, the State Pension Revaluation for Transitional Pensions Order NI 2024, and has no objection to the rule. Are we agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you, members. Agenda item 8, SR 2024/200, the Occupational Pensions Revaluation Order NI 2024, and that's contained at page 289. We considered the SL1 for this rule, members, at the meeting on the 7th of November, when we were content for the Department to proceed with making the rule. Do members have any objection to the rule?
No.
Therefore, can I ask that the Committee for Communities has considered SR 2024/200, the Occupational Pensions Revaluation Order NI 2024, and has no objection to the rule. Are members agreed?
Agreed.
Great, thank you, members. Yep. Okay, members, we're moving on then to item 9, which is a departmental briefing on budget 2024-25 and the 2025-28 budget process. So, briefing papers for this item, members, start at page 296. And I would now like to welcome the following officials to the meeting. So we have Cherry Arnold, who is Director of Financial Planning. Hi, Cherry. And Kathy Sands, who's Director of Finance, brackets WHG and ODG. So, Cherry, I think it's yourself who's going to make an opening statement, if I'm right, and then we'll move to questions from members.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and committee members. Thank you for the opportunity for myself and my colleague Kathy Sands to brief you today on the Department's 24-25 budget position, following the outcome of October monitoring, and on the Department's input to the budget 25-28 information gathering exercise. In advance of today, written briefing on both the current and future financial years has been provided for committee's consideration. Following our briefing today, Kathy and I would be happy to take any questions. Firstly, looking to 24-25, The department has faced a very constrained financial position this year, with opening shortfalls of 115.8 million or 17% in non-ring fence resource and 167.3 million or 48.5% against the capital bid submitted for the year. To live within the department's 24-25 resource allocation, 115.9 million of actions to live within budget were agreed by Minister in June. In addition to these actions, the department initially overplanned on non-ring fence resource by 10.8 million. This overplanning position was largely offset by 10.5 million in non-ring fence resource allocated to the department by the executive in June monitoring. Despite the significant actions taken to live within budget, including not increasing the department's headcount and holding fundlessness on arm's length bodies at 23-24 levels, only 91.2 million of actions have been delivered. Prior to October monitoring, the department faced a 24.1 million non-ring fence resource overcommitment related to homelessness, discretionary support, pay and running cost pressures in the department's funded arm's length bodies. The executive agreed the outcome of October monitoring on the 11th of November, with the department receiving 11.3 million to offset its non-ring fence resource DEL overcommitments. However, despite the additional 11.13 million allocation, the department continues to face an overall resource pressure in 24-25, predominantly related to the department's arm's length bodies, whose funding this year was maintained at 23-24 levels. Given 2.5 million of forecast reduced requirements are expected to year end, mainly due to staff attrition and delays in backfill recruitment and other running costs, a total of 13.7 was available for allocation following the October monitoring round. This available 13.7 million of resource funding will be used to provide Budget 24 mitigations. Measures being progressed align with the department's Budget 24-25 Equality Impact Assessment and will help offset the potential adverse impacts of the department's constrained budget on Section 75 groups and on the services and supports the department provides. The allocations are in the following areas. Minister announced on Monday a further 6.7 million of funding for the Northern Ireland Housing Executive to prevent the risk of homelessness service closures and ensure statutory obligations can continue to be met. 4.1 million has been provided to the department's other funded arm's length bodies to meet inescapable costs in relation to salaries, site maintenance, libraries book stock and delivery of services. And an additional 3 million is being provided to discretionary support to allow the department to continue to meet the high demand from people facing financial crisis, given the absence of cost of living payments this year and pressure on households. In terms of earmarked resource DEL, following the extension of the Household Support Fund in England, the department bid for 17 million of Barnett Consequential for winter fuel. The executive in agreeing the October monitoring outcome on the 11th of November allocated the available 17 million of funding to the department. While this funding will not fully alleviate the recent decisions taken at Westminster, it will provide a level of support to approximately 170,000 pensioner households impacted by the winter fuel payment changes this winter. In terms of capital DEL, the department's constrained 24-25 capital budget has been hugely detrimental on service delivery, particularly in relation to social housing and affordable warm scheme this year. As a result, throughout 24-25, the department continued to put forward the case for further capital. The department's total capital allocation now includes a further 20 million allocated in June monitoring and a further 24 million allocated in October monitoring for new build social housing. This will enable delivery of between 1,350 and 1,450 new housing starts this financial year. A further 1 million general capital allocation was provided in October monitoring, and this will be held centrally until firm decisions are taken on its allocation to support culture, arts and sports requirements. At this stage of the year, the department's financial transactions capital allocation of 29.8 million in 24-25 is in line with the forecasted need, and this will support loans or equity investment capital projects, including continuation of co-ownership affordable housing. The Department's financial position will continue to be closely monitored as the year progresses. A further update on the Department's Budget 24-25 financial position will be provided to the Committee in line with the timeframe for the Department's January monitoring return. Furthermore, following the Executive's agreement on the October monitoring round, work is also now ongoing to conclude on the Department's Budget 24-25 Equality Impact Assessment. The Department's final decision report is expected to be available in late December and will be shared with the Committee in advance of publication. In addition, the Executive's budget allocations, and which is outside the scope of our Equality Impact Assessment, the Department has an annually managed expenditure budget of $10 billion this year. This budget provides for the Department's Social Security benefit and pensions payments to customers, and a breakdown of our 24-25 aiming budget has been provided in a written briefing. Now looking to future years, Budget 25-28. The Department submitted its return to the DOF Commission 3-year Budget 25-28 information gathering exercise on the 8th of November. This return reflected the Department's Budget 25-28 earmarked resource requirements, non-ring-fence resource bids, capital bids, and our outline requirements for new mitigations and other supports. The Department's executive earmarked resource requirements total $164.5 million in 25-26, moving to $157 in 27-28. This includes requirements for the existing welfare mitigations, building safety scheme, housing benefit rates, and e-rating grant for councils. It should be noted that these earmark requirements were met in full in the Department's Budget 24 allocation. With regards to non-ring fence resource, the Department submitted bids totalling $177.3 million for 25-26, increasing to $216.8 million in 27-28. This includes bids for pay and price pressures, to fill vacancies, for homelessness and supporting people demanding support, for employment interventions, for pressures facing the Department's arm's length bodies and funded sectors, and to tackle welfare fraud. On capital, the Department submitted bids totalling $479.7 million in 25-26, increasing to $668.9 million in 27-28. This includes bids to deliver on 2,000 new social home starts, and for other housing measures included affordable warmth, for building safety, for urban regeneration, for culture and heritage assets, for welfare and city deals. However, on both the Department's non-ring fence resource and capital bids, given funding constraints at the Northern Ireland block level, allocations received for 25-26 are expected to fall short of the level of funding bid for. The Department also submitted its outline requirements of $824.9 million non-ring fence resource in 25-26, relating to new welfare mitigations and other support payments that largely have been recommended by independent advisory groups in relation to Social Security provision. These new measures would require collective executive support, sufficient recurrent funding, and the passing of associated legislation to be progressed. Following confirmation of the Northern Ireland 25-26 spending envelope in the Chancellor's Audit Statement on the 30th of October, the information provided by the Department, including the equality impacts if insufficient funding is not received, will inform the Executive in setting a draft 25-26 budget. At this stage, we understand the Executive is expected to consider Budget 25-26 in December. I hope you found our briefing informative, and Cathy and I are happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you. And some interesting issues in there. I suppose one of the things, first of all, that I would like to establish is we had asked for a briefing on the October monitoring, and this is the date we were given. And I'm just wondering, and genuinely wondering, why does it take so long, given October and we're now into the middle of December? Why does that process take so long?
I understand a written briefing was provided to committee. There was a delay in that issuing. Our finance teams and support teams in the department are operating 25% under-resourced. It is unfortunate that briefing didn't issue on time. and it's as a result of the staffing position that we're dealing with internally in the department.
And are there any steps being taken, or has there been a business case put forward to fill that gap?
We are seeking additional staff within the department, but we're limited this year by the constrained budget that we face. In terms of the department's affordable baseline to bring in additional staff, it's sitting at currently presently in the department of 311 staff. Whilst there's bids in for additional staff, we're really limited in terms of affordability. And the 25% vacancies that we have within our finance teams aren't affordable to fill.
Yeah, and that's a worrying, and I do recognise that's the reality, but it's also something that the committee, I suppose, have from the very start been flagging up the issue of vacancies and the impact that's having both on people and potentially, as part of this discussion, on the ability for the committee to scrutinise the finances of the department. So I think it's an issue of ongoing concern, let me put it that way, and one that certainly does need that ongoing focus. Let me just check with you. It said that there was a bid for the new measures that would need to be. What was the amount of bid for in the new measures in terms of welfare mitigations?
824.9 million.
Yeah. And what has the feedback been? You said that would need to be sustainable and ongoing. What's the feedback been?
Well, when I say it's not a bid as such, it's outline requirements. It's what the department would need. It would still need executive consideration. And obviously funding is likely to be constrained.
Okay. So what is the impact of that constraint likely to be? What are you dealing with in terms of how that impact or constraint can be managed?
In terms of the bid for new mitigations,
Yeah.
Our financial requirements have been put forward to the Department of Finance for executive consideration. And I know there's work ongoing within the department and looking forward on what Minister brings forward on new mitigations and other supports. Okay,
thank you. One that I do want to go to now to members very shortly, but has the Minister made any bids to increase the rate support grant for councils in 2025-26?
There's been no bids put forward in terms of the increased rate support grant. That's on the basis, as you know, that is actually a discretionary grant. And we had to take very tough decisions in terms of the constrained envelope this year, and there's an expectation that will continue as we move forward.
Yeah, and that is again, and probably a reflection of many years now of austerity. But I am acutely aware of the impact that's having on councils and their ability to deliver some of, the very important work that they could and should be doing. But okay, well, listen, thanks for that. So I'm going to Daniel and then Ciara and then Andy and Brian.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Sherry and Cathy, for being with us. Just to pick up on a point that the Chair raised in relation to the staffing shortages, and a question I raised with the Accounting Office of the Department of Communities at a previous session of this committee. I asked about how staff shortages were affecting performance and deliverability of various strategies and the work of the committee and of the department on a day-to-day basis, and he says that it wasn't affecting it. So I think it's important that we get some clarification as to how actually these shortages are impacting on the ability of the department to deliver, because you've said something entirely very different from what this committee heard a number of months ago from the Permanent Secretary. So, Chair, I think it's important we get some clarification around how these staff shortages are actually affecting people. And is it the case that there's unavoidable things that need to be delivered? Is it the case that existing staff could be offered overtime to complete the outstanding work?
Overtime this year has been significantly constrained. It's only for essential and out of hours work.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. Just in relation to the bid made by the Department, by the Minister, for the 17 million of Barna consequential funding to mitigate against the loss of the winter fuel payment. It's not very often in this place that we get what we ask for, and it raises more questions actually. Did we not ask for enough? Should the Department have asked for more? Why didn't we?
We aligned the ask with a Barnett consequential that came that was equivalent for the household support fund.
Okay, so there's a direct alignment.
Yes, there was.
Okay. You feel we would have got more if we had have asked for more?
I think it's unlikely. There's significant pressures across health education and all of the departments.
Okay. Another point I want to raise, Chair, just briefly, is why is the Department confident that the funding for the new build social housing will be entirely spent this year?
In engagement with our NIHE colleagues, the indication at the minute is in terms of the 168 million that they have got to date, that it will be spent. They are indicating that they have limited capacity in terms of what they could take at this point in the year. So this idea that we would meet 2,000 social home build, that is very unlikely at this junction.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Okay, and further point, just you predicted a reduction in the funding allocated for homeless interventions from 27.4 million in 25-26 to 10.1 million by 27-28. Why is that reduction so significant?
Sorry, the 27.4 million was the bid that's needed on top of what we have currently.
Okay.
And that covers a range of pressures. That's pressures in and around temporary accommodation, money needed for community prevention, and quite a significant amount of money for strategic prevention, because there's a realisation that we really need to look at the strategic piece in terms of homelessness and how we can put our levers in place, which in turn will help us for the spend on temporary accommodation.
So how do we transition into that space?
That will be due with the envelope of funding that we get in terms of 25-26. So obviously, as Cherry has indicated, we're waiting to see what the settlement is that we receive from the executive. We will undergo a scheme of work internally within our department to determine how Minister will determine how he's going to allocate that, and we will look at where best to put that funding. But it is on the radar, obviously, that strategic prevention is a need that the NIHE have expressed to us in the department.
They have a statutory obligation, obviously, as well, to ensure that people aren't living on the streets. But
the strategic prevention piece is that piece about looking at it in totality and what we can do to help bring costs down in the temporary accommodation arena.
yeah, but surely the common sense approach to this is the only way we can bring down those costs is by providing actual homes for people in the long term. So
the department has always said we see that the investment in social housing and homelessness spend being inextricably linked, and we accept that.
Yeah, okay. Final point, Chair, if just possible. Just the Social Security benefit delivery funding is predicted to rise from 16.9 million in 25-26 to 51 million by 27-28. Why is that?
That's for additional staff in the department. So the bid next year reflects 300 additional staff. We won't have those staff in through the door from the 1st of April. It'll take a period of time to onboard them, to bring them in, to train them, and that bid then increases in future years. In terms of additional staff and benefit delivery, we need over 1,000 staff at this point in time.
Okay, and what benefits will that additional staff bring? If you had it at full capacity tomorrow, for instance, what would it mean for?
Deliver on the move to universal credit at this stage, and we're forecasting we're going to see a 1-year lag behind the Department of Work and Pensions in terms of delivery on that.
Okay.
We don't have enough work coaches at the minute in our front offices as well to support people to move into better employment.
But it would just the 5-week wait as well for people in terms of universal credit and the transition?
No, it won't reduce the 5-week wait. That's a part of universal credit, but there is mechanisms in there in place such as universal credit advances and universal credit contingency fund.
Okay, so even at maximum capacity, that wait doesn't. Okay.
Okay, go ahead, Ciara, please.
Thank you, Cherry. Thank you, Cathy, and thank you for the reports. It's quite detailed. I've just a couple of questions. As you're well aware, obviously, here in the committee and working with the department and the Minister, we're very keen to bring forward a number of strategies. One is the housing supply strategy, likewise the anti-poverty strategy, likewise the disability strategy. I would just like to know, have any of the bids for these strategies been factored into the 25-26 budget moving forward?
There's a bid in for the disability and work strategy for implementation of that strategy. The department's hoping to bring that to the executive. I understand in early 2025, and it will be shared with committee as well.
And then
Can I just come in on that point? We hear several times mentioned reference to disability and work strategy. Is there a disability strategy plus a disability and work strategy, or is that one and the same thing? Maybe you don't know. And if it's not for your area, we can write to committee. But do you know, Cherry?
There's a disability and work strategy being progressed by the Work and Health Group in the department.
Is that separate to the disability strategy itself? Is that a sub strategy or part of, or separate, or instead of?
not sure. I think we'd have to go and get clarification for you.
The terms are used increasingly interchangeably, and I would like to get a sense that, like, we are expecting a disability strategy. Obviously, disability in work is also hugely important, but I would like some clarity going forward, and we'll pick up on that again in terms of the strategy as well. So
just in relation to the likes of the housing supply strategy, and I'm conscious you did mention that bids are in for 2,000 homes, which is great to hear, and that's where we want to be at, if not more, on an annual basis. And I'm just keen, obviously, is there any other kind of, bar the social housing development programme, is there any money factored in to drive forward both the likes of the housing supply and the anti-poverty strategy for 25-26?
In terms of sort of the, what I have mentioned already in the homelessness space, there certainly is money in there for strategic prevention, which has been bid for. In the specifics of the strategies, we might have to go back. I think I get some information and refer back to you on it to get the actual detail.
Okay. And then secondly, obviously, and I'm conscious, obviously, as you've mentioned, the resources that you are working and they bring forward. So it's something, and I know that has been happening over the past 3 or 4 years in relation to not bringing a full complement of staff in to do the work that these doing. So I do really appreciate the stresses that you are under to try and deliver based on the number of staff that you have. But what I'm concerned about, particularly for the department itself, but likewise for your arm length bodies, for those that currently have grants with the department regarding, and we discussed this earlier at the meeting, the employers, the NIC, and then obviously the 6.7% increase in the national living wage. So I'm wondering, has that been factored in to the department, and what does that look like moving forward?
Okay, so in terms of our arm's length bodies, they have given us an indication of what the employer's national insurance need is. Whenever we were given notification of that, obviously in the autumn statement. Then in terms of our sectors, our voluntary and community sector, they're not factored into these bids, obviously, because we're not employers, but there's a piece of work ongoing in the background to understand what that impact will be for them. There is a bid in for the sector. Obviously, Minister gave 1.45 million in terms of the current year, because he had a recognition of how important it was in terms of the work that they do. For future years, there is some funding built in terms of an increase for what we would give them going forward. But again, it's all on the basis, Ciara, of whether we get that funding met. Okay,
so I'm conscious there is funding in for an increment or an increase in the next financial year particularly. But I'm conscious there isn't in relation, you're currently looking at it.
There has been estimates made of what the impact will be on the sector, but whenever this exercise was completed, there wasn't a specific bid put in for the employer's national insurance requirement for the voluntary and community sector.
And the living wage is 6.7, and so that's...
There was some adjustment made in terms of sort of the real living wage. There was an estimate put in terms of it.
Okay. Would be something in the new year that you could furnish us as a department with in relation to where that's at, because we're already I'm out and about with the community voluntary sector, with our supporting people providers, and there really is huge anxiety post the new year where they may be, where it's got to the point where there's a range of organisations that provide vital services, have huge numbers of staff, and they will have to close their doors. And I know the department isn't the employer, but obviously it's a core service, and if they're looking for full cost recovery, so I would love to see what the department is doing in relation to bids to ensure that can be safeguarded moving forward regarding any additional costs that's required.
What I can say to you, obviously, in terms of this current financial year, Minister awarded an extra 4.8 million for supporting people, and while I appreciate that won't cover the increases for employers' national insurance, we will be keeping in good contact with our colleagues in the Northern Ireland Housing Executive to understand the impacts that's happening on the sector.
Oh, that's great, thank you. And just finally, what is, and I know you've mentioned it about the rate support grant, but what's the reasoning behind not looking for additional monies to support our local councils, particularly those that have a low rate space and are struggling? Is there a reason behind why there wasn't additional bids in to support our struggling council?
I think the reality of it was the very constrained envelope, which is we fell within both currently this year and what the indications are for future years. And obviously, you know, as I said at the outset, the rate support grant, while it's statutory in nature, it's discretionary in amount. And yes, you know, we've took a reduction, and whenever we are looking across the piece of bids and we have to prioritise bids, it wasn't one of the bids that is obviously meant to go forward. We didn't bid for additional funding. And I have to be honest, if we did, it would probably be at the lower spectrum of the bids in terms of priority ranking. And I mean, obviously you're going to look to your most priority areas to give your funding in the first place.
I suppose it's something we can come back to, because I'm conscious of all the local councils have collectively came together and have wrote to the department, have wrote to the minister, and have wrote to all of us in relation to the dire need, particularly for 5 or 6 local council areas, and particularly my own constituency of Foyle, where they have a low rate space and are struggling, and all councils would agree that support and additional support is required. So I'd like to come back on that probably maybe in the new year, just to see what was the deliberations and decision making around not going forward in the next financial year, but I know it can't be answered. Just finally then, Chair, you see regarding, and I don't know in what sequence, but the affordable warmth scheme, it's a big bugbear of mine, because I think it's just so critically important, and I have a lot of particularly private tenants that are in the system or are looking to be in the system moving forward. And you mentioned about bids, the monitoring rounds for January, was it in that context?
Yes.
And what is the bid in for that?
So in terms of affordable warmth, so I'm just going to bring you back to October monitoring. So we actually put a bid in of about 1.2 million for affordable warmth at October monitoring, and we didn't get anything.
Right.
But what has happened internally within the department, there has been some easements in and around urban renewal to do with the vesting of New Lodge, and that funding is going to be redirected to, there's some funding going to be directed to affordable warmth in and around about an extra £1 million. Now the indications from colleagues in NIHE, that's about as much as they can spend in this current financial year, obviously given the passage of time and where we currently sit. So it's unlikely from the initial conversations with them that we would go forward to have another bid in January. But certainly I'm quite happy here to take this away today and have that conversation again, just to make sure that that's absolutely the place that we're in.
So, no, and that's great news. I'm delighted to hear that. And it's you'd mentioned, just to get it clear in my head, you'd mentioned that the 1 million is what the housing executive can process, and I'm conscious, is that a resource issue or a timing issue to process eligibility, do the technical inspection, so that's what they can do within. Have you any idea, and I know we are waiting the outcome of it, of those maybe applications that demand that just won't be met within this financial year? Because I know we carried over 5 million from the previous year that probably could not be spent, so I don't know if it's a resource issue, just a timing issue, but there's a lot of people waiting quite a considerable amount of time to move forward. So I'm just wondering, have you any idea what the unmet need is currently sitting at? Not necessarily what can be delivered.
Okay, I don't have that figure with me, but I understand, I think housing colleagues had give you some briefing as to where they were in terms of the approvals and the stage and
the numbers,
else. What I can say to you is in terms of future years, the indications at the minute is a sort of a future commitment of about 5 million going forward into 25-26. And, you know, for 25-26, we have put forward bids of 15 million in the affordable warmth space. So about approximately 5 million carried forward and 10 million of new.
That's great. No, thank you.
Thank you, Ciara. Andy.
Thanks, Chair. Can we maybe just come back very quickly to the staffing, and in terms of the staffing complement within the department? Is there any forecast as to what it would cost to take the department to the full staff complement, as to what you forecast being required?
And well, in terms of additional staffing at the minute, we know we need 1,305 additional staff in the department to deliver food services, of which only 311 staff at this point in time are currently affordable.
And in terms of obviously that full complement, have you done any estimates as to how much that would cost or what the requirement would be?
We could do estimates of it, but at the end of the day, for a full financial year, it depends on recruitment timeframes. So I would need to bring you a cost back on what that would be.
And do you have any details on what the department's currently spending on agency staff and the cost and the comparative analysis as to if the department were to bring those staff within house as to the difference?
It would be additional to bring the staff in-house that are agency staff because of additional benefits such as pension costs. I don't have the financial figure of the agency staff with you. I can get it. Although I do know in terms of agency staff at the minute, we have 2,845 agency staff employed. 2,097 of those are delivering services for the Department of Work and Pensions, so they're fully funded by GB. And within DFC, we have 748 agency staff within the department.
Okay, I appreciate that. And maybe if we can then jump across to the disability and work strategy, and notwithstanding obviously the previous comments that you're going to clarify, obviously it's welcome that the bid in the 25-26 year is going up to 10 million in 27-28, and obviously that's in recognition of the low numbers, the 40% employment rate here in comparison with I think it's a 54% employability rate in the rest of the UK. Is that to expand current initiatives and schemes, or will that be bringing online new programmes and initiatives?
It's to do both. It's to obviously implement the strategy. There will be additional spend in that area if those bids are successful, but it will also complement as well to the existing programmes the department has in place.
What are those existing programmes?
There's Workable and Access to Work would be two of our disability programmes, and there's also elements through labour market partnerships with councils.
Okay, and then the additional programmes that you've mentioned are potentially coming online. Can you give any idea what they might be?
It would be in development dependent on the bids being met, but we have bids in for 22.9 million in 25-26 and 23.2 million the following year and 23.4 million the following year for a range of new employment interventions, parity with GB, including Job Start Phase 3.
Okay, and then jumping across to the contingency fund, which you've already referenced in relation to the 5-week wait for universal credit, is the budget line for that, is it currently being met, or is there underspends on that?
No, it's currently being met as well. We have sufficient funding at this stage in the year for the welfare mitigations package, including universal credit contingency.
Yeah, but in terms of being met, sorry, maybe rephrase that, is the budget line being achieved in terms of the number of people applying for contingency fund? Because it's quite often been highlighted that a lot of people aren't aware of the contingency fund, so is there any of the contingency fund going unspent?
The budget's being fully utilised at this stage, and we're not forecasting either a pressure or an easement on that.
Okay, and then finally, Chair, in terms of the forecast over the next 3 financial periods for the regional and football fund, can you provide a breakdown of that over the next 3 years as to the allocation?
Yep, I can do. Sorry, so in terms of the capital that's in there, if you reference sort of to Appendix 2.3 of the papers that we provided, Andy, within that is 33 million, 28 million and 15 million, and how that is split in 25-26 is 28 for the stadium and 5 for the Northern Ireland Football Fund, 26-27 is 24 and 4, and then 15 and 27-28 is all the football fund.
Okay, and is that on course to be delivered in terms of the new business plan for casement?
Sorry, so the delivery of casement is what you're asking me about. In terms of that, as you know, there's a lot of work ongoing in the background. These figures at the minute represent the earmarked executive funding. At the point in time where decisions are taken, that these figures will be refreshed for the need that is determined at that point in time.
Okay, so that's not taken into consideration any new costings for casement?
No, not at
the
this
previous
juncture.
ones. When were those estimates or forecasts from?
This position, capital position that you're seeing at the table reflects the executive commitment at this point in time. So that was the 62.5 million originally. The understanding is the 50 million euros from the Southern Government, and then the GAA contribution of 15. These figures reflect just the executive contribution of 62.5
And then,
million.
can I maybe ask, if you've got the details to hand, it'd be helpful. What has been the spend on both the sub-regional, as it was previously referred, and casement to date?
I would probably need to get those figures clarified rather than giving you the figures that off the top of my head. I'd rather come back to you to make sure that I'm giving you the right figures.
Okay, appreciate that. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Andy. Brian?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your attendance and answers so far. I wanted to ask, Ciara's already covered the issue of the increase in employees' national insurance contributions and national minimum wage stroke living wage in the new financial year. So just to clarify, in terms of funding community sector groups, is that being factored into their allocation for the next financial year, or is there a risk of groups being given the same allocation, with whether or not with a small percentage increase, but one where the reality will be they can't meet staffing contract?
And as it stands at this point in time, what I can say to you is, for this current financial year, Minister obviously awarded the extra 1.45 million. I can't preempt decisions in terms of 25-26 because we actually have to get our budget envelope in the first point. Once we get that budget envelope, that will then start a scheme of work within the department, determining what the ministerial priorities are and everything else, and we'll work our way through. So I can't say yes or no because I don't know at this juncture.
Right. Just because I know any time this happened before, groups find groups under neighbourhood renewal, they just have they're almost just given a block of money and told that's what you have to live within. And even though that was originally based on certain salaries, they're then in a position at times staff have been paid actually below the minimum wage, or that's what groups have said to me. Well, it's something we will continue to monitor. In terms of the allocation for social houses, and you give a range there that the actual output could be between 1350 and 1450 this financial year, depending just on whatever way it's calculated. If all that number of homes isn't able to commence actually during the financial year, will that funding roll over? Because given obviously we've only a small number of months left, or is there danger that funding could be lost to the social housing programme?
What I would say, Brian, in conversations both with my housing colleagues within the department and with NIHE, there are no indications at this point in time that they will not spend the budget they've been given. So it's about 168 million at this point in time. Conversations are indicating that they have limited ability to take much more capital funding on top of that for social housing for this 24-25 year. But I think there's no indication that we're not going to spend at this juncture. And in terms of the additional funding that we could perhaps ask for, I think they're reworking where we're going to land, and it's looking like in and around the 1,500. So that's way short of where we would have started the year with the desire to build 2,000 social homes.
They're expecting the total will actually be around 1,500?
1,500, okay. I think.
Okay.
On the 1,500, if we got about 5 million more. So that's what the indications are at this point in time, that they only would have capacity to take about 5 million. So bear in mind, it's at a point in time, and we will revisit that. We will revisit that now as part of the January monitoring round. Okay,
but there's enough proposals in the system and ready to go that funding can be up.
The indications from my housing colleagues and from NIHE that yes, that they are comfortable that is deliverable, but I'm not saying that there's not challenges in that, as I understand some of the programmes that are there, that they're high risk and there's a lot of things to tee up.
Yeah. Okay. And last question, just in October monitoring around an extra 3 million for discretionary support. Can you just clarify, is that discretionary, what is the nature of that discretionary support? Is that benefits related as such, or does it include any elements? So some housing support is discretionary, including like for adoptions for homeowners and so on?
No, it's for people in financial crisis who are able to apply and get a discretionary support grant. Our budget this year was set initially at 22 million. We've seen significant additional demand on there. High inflation, food prices are still high, people and households are still struggling. That 22 million wouldn't be sufficient to cover off demand to the end of the year. So the budget's now being allocated to sustain that to the end of the financial year. And it's also in the absence as well. In previous years we had the cost of living payments that that over 300 million, they're no longer there this year.
Right. Okay, so it is just it's supplementary for the welfare payments as such?
It's not viewed as a welfare payment as such, but it's for people that are struggling.
Mm-hmm. Okay, but it's not housing. Just I know some housing grants are described as
there's discretionary housing, it's separate.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Andy, you're looking back.
Sure, yeah. Just two further follow-up questions. See, in terms of that forecast for the next 3 financial years for social housing build, is that to maintain the 2,000 target, or is there any ambition to go beyond that?
There's actually ambition to go beyond that, and the figures that are provided you in that appendix. So the intention at the minute is to increase that to 2,150 and then to 2,300. But I would just say, bear in mind, all of these are indicative. We will come back and revisit. There will be a chance to actually go back and look at these figures because I understand that there's a bigger aspiration in the programme for government, and we need to work that all through.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's crucial. I think obviously we need to be looking to build on. Obviously, it's disappointing we haven't been able to achieve the 2,000 currently. Obviously, we all know the problems and challenges with that, but we need to be looking at ambition. And also, am I reading that correctly in terms of co-ownership? Is that a reduced requirement over the next 3 years, minus?
No, that is actually the receipts that are in there, Andy. So the receipts actually give us some spending power, and they just happen to be that they're put at a separate line in terms of the presentation of this.
And where's those receipts going then?
The receipts come into the department. So overall, we would have about 45 million of receipts on co-ownership, house and land sales, and various other things, and they give us some spending power in terms of our capital programmes.
Is that 9 million over those each corresponding years going into the new social housing?
Housing's the first place that would get the receipts, and then we work our way through as a department in terms of the priority for it all.
And then just on FTC, and obviously the highlight there around the ambition, that's coming online for the intermediate rent offering very soon. The Minister said, what's the ambition moving forward to utilise FTC for further programmes and initiatives to help complement other schemes and initiatives?
So what you can see in the table 5 that we provided in the paperwork, it shows you really nearly a doubling of the FTC ask in 25, 26, 48. It's actually gone up to 87, and within it is the intermediate rent. There's nearly 27 million in for it alone. Obviously, there's within this, obviously subject to making sure we have our proper approvals in place.
What's the other amounts for then beyond the intermediate rent?
Okay, we have about 39 million in if we look at 25, 26, we have about 37 million in co-ownership. We have about 5.5 million in retrofit schemes, a couple of small amounts, and then we have the voluntary and community loan scheme, which is already up and running. It then moves up, so you have about a 32 million increase in 26, 27, primarily driven by the intermediate rent.
Yeah, and then finally, Chair, is there anything factored in? Obviously, we're waiting to see the fuel poverty strategy go out for consultation. Is there anything factored in for that? I know, obviously, I'm asking you to forecast ahead, but that's importantly what the department has to do. Is there anything factored in around initiatives and programmes for tackling fuel poverty?
Yeah, so in terms of our normal capital, so obviously the fuel poverty scheme and the replacement for affordable warmth are factored in future years. I just don't have the figure to hand, and I certainly know that there's some, as I've mentioned, you there in the FTC, this idea of a retrofit scheme, which is in and around fuel poverty as well. And I certainly know that there is, looking across sort of the arts and culture groups, there was some desire to have a scheme that would be looking at renewable energies across those sectors.
But there's nothing, obviously we've got the retrofit is potentially new, and affordable warmth has been being delivered, and Ciara has obviously succinctly covered that, but there's nothing new that's being identified within the engagement pieces, and it's been extensive through the fuel poverty strategy. There's nothing new coming out that the department will be looking to bring online.
I'll just double check that, Andy, because I'm not comfortable saying without just double checking the sort of schedule of what's in them projects.
Appreciate that. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Andy. Brian?
Yep, just follow up to Andy on intermediate rent, just from my own understanding. Is there any intermediate rent product currently available, or is it active?
Not within this jurisdiction.
Right.
My understanding, I should say, is that there are in other jurisdictions, but not here. But obviously, the work's ongoing to get all of sort of the arrangements in place in terms of a business case and everything else that's needed.
Right. And when it is delivered, will it require a public subsidy
year on year, or is it meant to be some self-financing?
Yeah, so how it's been financed is obviously through the FTC, so we will get that money repaid. So it's good news in that sense, in that it's not handing out, we're actually getting our money returned to us.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ciara.
It's just one wee query. It's just in relation to Table 4, the capital DEL requirements, where it outlines obviously housing, which is great. It's just in relation to the voluntary and community sector, 0.2 for 25-26,
Yes.
0.6 and then 0.1. Can you clarify for me, is that the likes of capital
Yes.
project? Is that small capital
Very
items?
small, that's minor capital items.
Right, so in relation to the large capital projects that a range of organisations currently have in the system, whether it's on through Neighbourhood Renewal Partnership and your local neighbourhood renewal units within, for instance, the North West Development Office, and I'm aware of many, where would that budget sit? Where would those projects sit within the capital requirements within the department? Is it under urban regeneration, or is it just...
I'm not sure now. Are we talking about public realm, Ciara, or are you
No, I'm
down at the
talking about
just the
actually
voluntary
bids
communities?
by community organisations through Neighbourhood Renewal Partnership Boards, which are then submitted to the Department for Communities. So there's range of ambitions, say, particularly say for instance out of North Air, which I visited yesterday. They have a huge ambitions. They have a list, a capital list, which is always submitted to the likes of the North West Development Office, who then bid alongside the Belfast Regeneration Office for core capital projects.
Yes,
The budget is always quite small anyway. There's high competition, but there's always a massive demand with quite low money. So I'm wondering,
they're
just
within your regeneration piece. It's
They
just
are.
whenever you've mentioned your North West Development Office and your Belfast region, that falls within the regeneration piece, the 45 million.
do you just double check then at the community level, at the neighbourhood renewal level?
Yeah.
Is that within that budget, and does one compete against the other? I'm just not sure regarding this, because I'm conscious of the North West Development Office has its own ambitions regarding major capital projects that the department takes forward along with a range of stakeholders, which is great. But neighbourhood renewal is quite separate and different, and it's a different team. So I just don't see, at the moment all I see is 0.2, 0.6, 0.1, and I would be gravely concerned if that's the level of capital that's going to be available for the huge ambitions that the CMV sector have in neighbourhoods. You know, so
I'll clarify that.
that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you. Final one then from me. The briefing paper states that 115.9 million of actions to live within the budget were agreed by the Minister in June, yet only 91.2 million had been delivered, which left an overcommitment of 24.7 million. I know you might have touched on it, but can you just explain why there was such a large overcommitment, and it is sizable enough, what the current level of overcommitment you assess to be, and what the Minister's doing to live within that?
Yeah, so obviously a range of actions were agreed with the Minister in terms of living within a resource budget. In terms of the 91.2 million of actions that were delivered, 27 million of that came from not filling vacancies. 35 million of that came from not meeting additional pressures in our arm's length bodies and homelessness. We had the 1.8 million cut of rate support grant, and there was a range of other internal efficiencies that were taken forward, including or curtailing overtime to essential and out of hours within the department, and looking really robustly at our contracts to try and manage them as best we could. Prior to October monitoring, we were then facing that 24.1 million, and obviously we have seen some slippage in terms of easements in the department or reduced requirements. We've seen further reductions in terms of our staffing, quite high levels of attrition. We are losing staff within the department, and despite recruitment delays, we've seen further easements come out there. So that allowed us then to provide a higher allocation out in terms of our October monitoring allocations, increasing that to 13.7. That position was the assessed position 7 months into the financial year, so it was up to the end of October. We still have another 5 months to go of this financial year. There's a bit of a lag, obviously, in us getting our financial figures every month. We do believe, on track to deliver a balanced budget this year, but we are obviously dependent on there being further slippage in programmes or continued proactive actions being taken to manage our budget internally within the department to live within. So at this stage in the year, we feel we will live within our budget, but there's still a way to go, and there is pressures, and we are, as I said, continuing to see attrition.
Okay, and given that attrition then, and given we understand, we've heard very directly today, not only the impact on service users, on arm's length bodies, but even within the department's own function, those impacts, that attrition in a situation where we have 1,300 vacancies is very worrying. Is any of that attrition down to the 1,000 new jobs that were announced in relation to working for Department of Work and Pensions? Or what do you put the attrition down to?
There has been, we've got an ageing workforce within the department, but in some of our recruitment competitions, there was one recently. We know we're an exporting department, so we're losing staff to other departments. There's 34 staff will be exiting the department, going to other departments that we can't retain.
Okay, and is there an overall workforce plan within the department to address longer term? Because I do think even outside of budget, I think you could struggle in some ways to recruit that scale of staff within the current climate. So is there a workforce plan, a standalone workforce plan for the Department for Communities?
In terms of an actually documented workforce plan, there's been a lot of work being progressed in terms of workforce procedures. It's very hard to have a workforce plan where you've been continually year on year operating with 1 year budgets. We do have and have developed internally within the department a resource planning model that tells us what our staffing requirements right through to 27-28. It outlines the shortfall we have and it outlines what's affordable. And in line with that model, we're taking forward then obviously our recruitment plans within the department. But it is hugely challenging with consecutive 1 year budgets and the shortfalls of funding that we've seen.
Okay, real brief from Brian, please.
Just further to the Chair's question, when you say about the department losing staff to other departments, would you say that's normal churn or people moving for advancement or whatever, or are other departments, do you think, seen as more attractive, or is it the nature of the work?
Other departments have bids in and our department hasn't secured some of the additional funding that we would need. Department of Work and Pensions secured funding for 3 years up to the end of March 25 for 900 additional staff to deliver benefits. DFC didn't. Another example, Department of Work and Pensions has secured funding in the autumn budget 22 and again in autumn budget 24 for additional staff to tackle fraud and welfare. They were able to bring in an additional 6,000 staff. DFC hasn't secured the funding to do that in terms of parity. So because we haven't been able to do that, we're operating with shortfalls. We've been trying to live with a hugely difficult budget position over the last number of years. We are also a very large department, so whenever there is a recruitment competition, we have a very large number of staff that are applying, and obviously departments have the opportunities to put in bids because of the funding shortfalls that we have and the level of vacancies that we have in the department. We haven't been able to retain all of those staff, and we are an exporting department now.
Is that primarily people are moving to speak plainly for a higher salary or for greater job security? Or
A lot of those are going on promotion.
So it is promotion, it's people advancing.
They're advancing,
yeah,
and they're moving to other departments.
Mm-hmm. And
Thank you, Brian. I'll have to move on.
But I just wanted to ask briefly,
Go ahead.
Out of the 2845 agency staff, 2,000 of the DWP contract, if I noted correctly. So that's a very large number in the DWP work. Is that because, is there a reason for that? Is that contract with DWP time limited? Is there a reason why there's so many agency staff in that contract?
It was a mix when that contract was brought in. We ramped up to deliver DWP business over the last number of years. It's a really good thing for the Northern Ireland economy. This year it's bringing over 130 million of additional funding into the Northern Ireland economy. And in total, actually, we have 3,951 staff employed by the department, a mix of both permanent and agency staff delivering services for GB. Plus we've also got agreement with DWP to bring that up to 4,600. So there's another 1,692 vacancies to fill posts within Northern Ireland to deliver services for GB. In some ways it's a good outcome.
Oh no, it's great that we get those jobs.
Yeah.
Is it partly just then the number of posts that need to be filled in such a short period of time.
Yeah,
So many are through agencies.
It has been. DWP, as I said, those examples of additional staff for benefit delivery and for fraud in our investment, they've come to us because the services the department provides have been first class, and they've been able to provide us with the funding to do that. The other side of that is, in terms of being able to maintain parity, we can't. We haven't secured the funding.
And it comes at a cost in relation to the core function of the department, which the department have a duty to protect as well. And I do recognise that it's economically it's good, but there is a line there where we need to be very careful that we can deliver the core functions. Daniel?
Chair, thanks very much for being so open about the challenges in relation to staffing. I am very uneasy with this because I've been raising this since the return of this Assembly in February. The Minister and your Permanent Secretary have both said on numerous occasions in the House and at this committee that there's nothing to see here. It's not affecting anything within the department. There's no problem, even though I've produced freedom of information requests, information and everything else, and yet I'm told there's nothing to see. What you're telling me today is entirely the opposite of what we've been told to date, and I've been raising it since February. So I'm a bit confused, Chair, about what is going on within the department. The Minister challenged me in the House, even though I had very clear figures in relation to the challenges the department are facing in terms of staffing. But today what you're telling me is entirely the opposite of what the Minister and the Permanent Secretary have told me in writing, in the Assembly and at this committee. So there's something that doesn't sit right. There's also something that doesn't sit right within this department, given the huge level of people that are leaving. Is there any clear indication as why staff want to leave this department? Because in some of the correspondence that I'm receiving, particularly from people within the department, I am told there's a very bad taste in relation to the very high levels of temporary promotions that have been there for a long period of time. That affects fair competition, fair progression to the system. There's major questions around how this department are operating with staff. And every time I raise it, this door's shut. But today, thanks to these presentations, the door's well open again. And I'll be asking quite a number of questions, Chair. There's something that doesn't sit right.
We have a request in with the Permanent Secretary to come.
Yeah.
So. Okay, listen, there's a lot covered there, I have to say. Andy, sorry, were you looking? Sorry, Andy.
Yeah, Chair, just I maybe need a session on my own to go through all of this.
You're welcome.
I'm glad you said it, Andy.
See, in terms of the welfare mitigations at Table 1, the executive earmarked resource del requirements, those requirements there are to maintain welfare mitigations as they're currently being delivered.
Yes.
And that hasn't factored in any review, so there's no sort of viewpoint as to change in the delivery of those existing mitigations.
Yeah, we have an obligation under the Welfare Supplement Payments Act 2022 to bring forward a statutory report on the assessment of the existing welfare mitigations. That report has been completed. They are hoping to lay that in the Assembly. I understand possibly by the end of this year, but don't quote me on that.
Those figures, have they taken that review into consideration?
The timing of this, the budget bids actually going to DOF and that being collated probably were a little in advance, but we have factored in what we need and our bid reflects the requirements to deliver the existing welfare mitigation schemes over the next 3 financial years.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. So listen, thank you very much. There's been a lot covered there today, and I really welcome the extent of the answers. And it does highlight for me the importance of doing this on a very regular basis, because to retain that sort of corporate knowledge about what we spoke about last time. So I will be talking about trying to ensure that we have good timely briefings coming on a regular basis. But thank you for the paper you provided with all the breakdowns. Thank you for the supplementary and the detail behind that you've given today. And I appreciate your attendance, and thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, members, so I will touch now upon, there's a few things I've raised there in terms of some maybe additional items, and we can see if there's anything else. But some of the things that have been raised throughout there is around the staffing and the impact of that staffing, an update from the department. Go ahead, Daniel.
Yeah, this is very frustrating. From February, we have asked on countless occasions about staffing, because we've had the numbers, we knew the challenges were there, we were told it isn't affecting anything within the department, business as usual. The Minister just rebutted everything I said in the chamber in relation to it. The same with Assembly questions, and the Permanent Secretary just dismissed it. So what we're hearing today is entirely very different from what we've been told from February. So it's infuriating, to be honest with you. So what has changed? It isn't a new problem. It's the same problem that was there in February that they completely rejected.
So would the action be that we seek a written update on the impacts on the staff and situation and on any plans to address that? And as I've mentioned there already, we do know that we're seeking the permanent secretary to come, so there'd be an opportunity to ask. But would members agree that we seek an update from the department?
A request for some honesty would be a good starting point, because I don't think the department are telling us, giving us a true reflection of how things are, to be honest with you. And it might have been the case that prior to the Assembly sitting, prior to February, they may not have been as under pressure as they are today, which I would struggle to understand how that would be the case. But it may be the case that now that we're back, they're busier. I don't know. But there's some reason why now all of a sudden in December they're telling us something very different than the responses we were getting from February. And like, I could refer to countless pieces of correspondence where they've just rejected any concern that I've raised.
Yeah.
I suppose it's more asking getting the factual information, because I'm aware over the past few years, given the pressures on the budget, that there has been like a moratorium on recruitment, etc., increase in promotion, and it's a balancing act. And I think they've made it quite clear there today, the high level attrition, and when it comes to cutting corners, it's the department that's suffering because they don't want to let go of core programmes that need investment. So it's a balancing act. You can only do that for so long, where it does start to have an impact on staff being able to deliver on time, etc., So it's more, where's the baseline there? I suppose it'll probably come out in the EQIA regarding, like, is there a baseline regarding the number of staff that's required? Now, I know they've mentioned a huge deficit there. Is it? They have an ongoing recruitment process since this time last year. I think it went out last December. So it'd be useful. And then they're nearly competing against themselves with their current contracts with DWP, which is critical investment, which is critical employment. So that's all very good. So it's just probably being able to monitor how successful they are in the recruitment into the department, separate from the DWP contracts. Since December of last year, to try and meet the demand. And maybe there is particular areas, whether it is finance or wherever within the department, or different scales. It'd be useful to have a breakdown of the levels of staff shortages, and where is there particular pressure points, because, and is that included within their workforce development plan, which they said they do have up until 2027. But it's just useful, because I'm conscious at our last committee meeting we had Emer Morelli and it was quite the same thing. I got a feeling regarding even the development of the strategies, there's huge pressure on the staff regarding being able to, because there's a huge volume of work, and given the...
And that's probably leading to the high level of people leaving the post then, because they're under too much pressure.
Well, we can't assume that, but
that probably is the case.
It's probably from last December, I think it is, when they went out with a big, huge, full recruitment process. How has that been, and what has been the increase over the last year to resolve the staffing pressures?
Just to supplement that, Chair, briefly, when they did run a recruitment process, they interviewed, I think it was 400 people, and the process was disregarded because they couldn't hear, or there was a technical issue with the process. I got an answer in relation to the Assembly question. It was public knowledge at the time. But basically they interviewed about 400 people, and it turned out that they couldn't be considered because there was some technical glitch with the system.
And although I hear what Sherry said there in relation to the difficulty around not having multi-annual budgeting, and I would fully support that they would have that multi-annual, to me that doesn't necessarily indicate there is work that could be done around retention, and I would like to know, is there a strategy around retention given what we're hearing today, and also are they doing leaver interviews to find out why people are leaving, and that then could maybe inform a retention strategy, because I think there's a need to protect, given it's bad as it is, the department needs to protect against further slippage.
Now, when you say that, I just have to make the comment for someone with a bit of conflict that worked in the community involved sector for 20 plus years, but from 2009 having an annual budget does have an impact. So I can understand from a department point of view now, you do start to have a high turnover of staff, because if you're looking to employ someone and you're only guaranteeing them, if you're 6 months into recruitment, you've only 6 months left, and who's taking that risk to move into a job that they may not have? So the department is actually going through the same pressures now that the CMV sector have been going through since the likes of 09 too, regarding the pressures on having a 1 year budget. You know, so.
I agree with Ciara entirely in what she's saying, but you know, this isn't a new problem. You know, the 1 year budget saga has been an issue that has been raised on countless occasions over many years by every department that I've engaged with. And there really needs to be a question to the executive is, you know, what are you doing about these budgets? We've talked about the need for multi-year budgets, we talk about it, but there's nothing happening in relation to it, and then we hear about all the various implications of it, and yet we talk about it further and further with no action. So, you know, if multi-year budgets is the solution to a lot of our problems, why aren't they happening? That's the, you know.
Just to wrap up that end of it, Clerk, do you need to seek any clarity around?
So this letter is specifically with regard to staffing shortages and impact on the departmental delivery, to include an update on recruitment that's ongoing, workforce planning, the success of recruitment and retention programmes which are not related to DWP contracts, particularly in the last year.
Yeah.
Does that cover everything?
Yep. Members content with that? Thank you.
I've just got a bit of clarification here in relation to the interview process. So the interview process was pre-recorded. Applicants sent in the recorded answers and the sound quality was so poor that the applicants were disregarded. So that's the sort of nonsense that's going on. And hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people went through that ridiculous process and no one picked it up. So that shows you the level of competence that there is, to be honest with you. So there's a major problem there.
Okay, thanks members. The other thing was then there's a request for clarity around the disability strategy versus the disability and work strategy. So we had asked earlier for an update in relation to timelines, so could we include that as part of that correspondence, or should we include it under finance, Clerk, separately?
No, we can ask that question. Yeah.
Include that. Rate support then, there was a follow-up on that. What was the detail on the follow-up?
Whether or not committee wanted to seek a further update later.
Clarity as to why there was no request put in for an increase in it, and then likewise the capital budget for neighbourhood renewal areas as well.
Neighbourhood renewal, clarification on that. Members content with that. Yeah. Okay, thank you for that, members. So before we go into our final briefing with the Cliff Edge Coalition, we'll take a short break there and get that session organised. So if we could come back then at 11:45, please, to resume, and we're a little behind time, so members bear that in mind. Thank you. And take us out of broadcasting, please.
Committee Room 29, Sound. 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 Committee Room 29. 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 Sound.
That sheet confirmed open.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, thank you, members. So we're resuming now at agenda item 10, which is briefing this morning by the Cliff Edge Coalition. So I'd like to welcome the following representatives to the meeting. So just in order of the way I have them listed here, we have Holly Knox, who's Policy and Community Engagement Officer at the Law Centre, NA. Morning, Holly, and very welcome. Louise Heatherley, Welfare Rights Advisor at Law Centre, NA. Morning, Louise. Fiona Cole from Trussell, who is standing in for Johnny, and Fiona's Policy and Public Affairs Manager at Trussell. And Stephen Morrison, who is Policy Coordinator at Housing Rights. Welcome, Stephen. So I think, Holly, it's yourself that I'm going back to for opening remarks, and then we'll get to members' questions, please. Thank you.
So good morning, everyone. My name is Holly Knox, and I'm the Policy and Community Engagement Officer at Law Centre NI. I'm really pleased to be joined here today by my colleagues Louise Heatherley, Legal Officer at Law Centre NI, Fiona Cole, Policy and Public Affairs Manager, and from Trussell, and Stephen Morrison, Policy Coordinator from Housing Rights. Today we're speaking on behalf of the Cliff Edge Coalition, and we thank the committee for this opportunity today. The Coalition is made up of over 100 organisations from across Northern Ireland, and we strongly believe in the necessity of sustaining and strengthening the welfare mitigations. The need for such measures is particularly acute in the context of the ongoing cost of living crisis. We note the committee's motion on welfare supplementary payments tabled for debate next week, and we support this motion and wish you every success with it. In addition to maintaining the existing mitigations, the Coalition has three key asks. First, it's to resolve the 5-week wait in universal credit. Second, to remove the two-child limit. And the news from Scotland yesterday, so this is the commitment to abolish this measure and lift 15,000 children out of poverty. It demonstrates what is possible. And third, it's to provide support for private renters affected by the local housing allowance. And my colleagues beside me will be outlining each key ask. With regards to the benefit cap, we welcome the Minister for Community's recent announcement to bring forward legislation to extend this beyond the 31st of March 2025. This is something we have consistently campaigned upon as a coalition, and we welcome this development. However, that said, we have not yet seen the detail of the forthcoming legislation, and we would like to do so, and if it's helpful, we could then share our analysis with the committee. Statistics published last week by the Department demonstrate the absolute importance of this mitigation. We know that 1,370 individuals have had their benefit cap mitigated through a welfare supplementary payment, and all of those households involve children, and some are losing more than £100 per week. We must make sure that the proposed regulations provide watertight protection for these families. I'll now hand over to my colleague Fiona, who will present the first key ask.
Thank you, Holly. It is worth reminding ourselves that our benefit system should be there to anchor any one of us against the tide of poverty, which is help when help is needed most. But evidence shows us time and time again how the designed in 5-week wait for universal credit payment fatally undermines this principle, leaving households in debt, facing poverty and destitution. Chair, I do not need to tell you or your members the pitfalls of the 5-week wait. What I intend to do is interrogate through lived experiences some of the technical aspects. It is also worth noting all evidence comes with a vulnerability, and unfortunately that is too often preyed on by illegal lenders, specifically paramilitaries. Foyle Network Foundation have launched a campaign with a stark warning that people have been pushed into debt and poverty is intensified due to paramilitary organisations exploiting and coercing vulnerable people. Larne Food Bank expressed the same concerns yesterday with Minister Lyons. The reality is, if you're waiting for 5 weeks with no access to funds, you've exhausted the grace of friends and family support, or if you're isolated, people often think there's no other choice. I spoke with our South West Food Bank. Whilst these testimonies are anonymised, permission has been sought to share with you today. I warn you, they're not easy listening. Tragically, a couple who had a joint claim for a sudden illness, his husband's wife passed away. Not only was the husband left with his grief and all that it embodies, his universal claim had become a change of circumstances. His loss of a loved one became overshadowed by his loss of income, resulting in him needing to use a food bank during his 5-week wait. A mother who finally had the courage to flee domestic violence from her abusive husband was placed in temporary accommodation, a single room with her children in a hotel. Due to the coercive control, she had no access to her joint finance. The food bank had to intervene with kettle packs, which is when you don't have access to cooking facilities, and money to allow her children to access school buses and transport. Her mental health, understandably, was already impacted. On top of surviving and processing years of domestic violence, she also now had to face and deal with destitution. The current themes in all testimonies is that claimants were not aware of discretionary support in form of the contingency fund. Bearing in mind 40% of food bank users have expressed they've received no financial advice, and a further 11% cannot remember. I referred to our financial inclusion lead and some food banks when I posed this question. It was almost an identical answer. They weren't aware of it. They weren't offered the contingency fund, only the advance payment. We are questioning why. Chair, I would like to conclude my section with this consideration. Hunger is not a food problem, it is an income problem. And while Trussell relentlessly campaigns Westminster to guarantee our essentials, making sure every UK citizen receives a basic level of income, whilst we're here in Northern Ireland, the mitigations against the likes of the benefit cap is so severely needed. If we didn't have this could trigger another. If we didn't have this, it would trigger another 5-week wait if people have to, for instance, move house or have a change in their circumstances. A lot of people would have to give up their work. We all agree this cannot happen, and whilst we applauded the Minister's statement on the extension of welfare supplementary payments, we all know the devil is in the detail, and we welcome continually working with you on this matter. Thank you. I will now invite Louise to discuss the two-child limit.
Thank you, Fiona, for highlighting the issues around that 5-week wait period with universal credit that we're all painfully aware of. And I'm going to deal with our key ask 2, the removal of the two-child limit. Thank you for the opportunity today to address the committee on this pressing matter, as we have now reached the end of 2024 and we were here 6 months ago. I am a legal officer in the Law Centre working in the Anti-Poverty and Social Security Rights Project, and I've been working in the advice sector since before the two-child limit was introduced over 7 years ago. And I have witnessed its impact on vulnerable families over the years. But now we are at crisis point. The Law Centre supports the advice sector as a second-tier organisation to provide advice and representation, and we are now dealing with the complexities of managed migration to universal credit as the rollout is happening at pace, with tax credits ending in March 2025. We have seen a marked increase in calls from very stressed social security advisors who are dealing with multiple issues with universal credit and getting claims up and running and dealing with mistakes. Never before has it been more important to get independent advice, and we are supporting the advice sector in flagging issues and patterns. In fact, tomorrow we have our regional advisor network meeting to do just that. The two-child limit amounts to a loss of £3,455 per child per annum. In a report by Save the Children there in April 2024, it states 1 in 10 children are impacted by the two-child limit. In reality, this means children are going without essentials, like nutritious food or a warm enough home, and they don't get to enjoy the same enriching experiences as other children. Parents have told us of children going to school in uniform that doesn't fit, missing out on after-school clubs, and not being able to have friends to their house as there isn't enough food to feed an extra mouth. The unfairness of the policy is more stark when considering the average family size here in Northern Ireland is larger than Great Britain, with 21.4% of families in Northern Ireland having 3 or more children, compared to 14.7% in the UK. The Child Poverty Action Group has reported the costs of child poverty are estimated to be £39 billion per year in the UK, and estimates that ending the two-child limit is the most cost-effective way for the government to reduce child poverty. Therefore, for Northern Ireland, we endorse the recommendation of the Independent Advisory Panel report, which recommends the mitigation of the two-child limit through the introduction of a welfare supplementary payment called a Better Start Larger Families Payment. Only yesterday, the Scottish Government have acted to scrap the two-child limit. And so today, we ask the Northern Ireland Government to act. Not acting to deal with child poverty will cost us all more in the long run. I am happy to give examples and answer questions on social security to assist the committee today, and we are happy to scrutinise any pending legislation and to assist the department. Thank you. I'm now going to hand over to my colleague in Housing Rights.
Thank you, Louise. Our third ask concerns the private rented sector, particularly helping the most vulnerable of tenants maintain their tenancies and avoid homelessness. Over the past decade, cuts to housing benefits in the private rented sector have made it increasingly difficult for low-income private renters to keep their homes. The impact of these cuts is evidenced by the fact that there are significantly more households at risk of poverty after housing costs in the private rented sector in Northern Ireland than in the social rented sector, and the fact that a loss of rented accommodation is one of the top 3 causes of homelessness in Northern Ireland. If you put this in the very worrying context the private renters face at the minute, which is high and vastly or rapidly inflating rent. Rent in Northern Ireland at the minute is an average of £868 per month. In Belfast, that's over £1,000. There are around 50,000 people on housing benefit or universal credit housing costs in Northern Ireland with a shortfall between their benefit and between the amount of rent they're paying. And the average of that shortfall is £129 for people on universal credit and £97 a month for those on housing benefit. What's particularly worrying is the lower quartile of rent as a percentage of lower quartile of income is at 45.4%. So for the lowest or the poorest 25%, the private tenants in Northern Ireland are spending almost half of their income on their rent. That's pushing people into deep poverty, and as we've just discussed, there's children going without food, essentials, nutrition. And when you consider the high proportion of single parent families that are in the private rented sector, that's particularly impactful. While we welcome protections from the social sector, in the social sector they've been provided to social housing tenants through better and tax mitigations. No such protections exist for low-income private renters, many of whom wish to access social housing, but have not been able to due to lack of supply. Furthermore, social landlords have designed an effective infrastructure of support to help their tenants deal with changes to social security, as well as building up strong working relationships in order to help tenants access support. While considerable attention has been given to the need for this, private tenants' support is a lot more ad hoc and a lot less structure afforded to it. So our proposed solution is that a fund be set aside within a strength and mitigation package for a specialist comprehensive financial inclusion service to support low-income renters with the totality of affordability issues that they face. The service would also include access to a grant to meet the most pressing need not met by existing support. And this financial inclusion service was costed and recommended by the Independent Welfare Mitigation Review. I'll go through just some of the key principles and very happy to answer questions on any more detail about it. But the key principles of the service should be independent, should be delivered by an independent organisation given its role, should be client-centred, specialist, accessible and efficient. Some of the key elements would be pre-tenancy affordability checks, help with income maximisation, financial capability support and debt counselling, and identifying additional support needs and signposting to relevant services. The grant support aspect, access to the grant would be referred through referral from the Financial Inclusion Service only, and that's for a number of reasons. To ensure eligibility for other forms of assistance have been exhausted first. To ensure that tenants also receive relevant and appropriate support, which may prevent a situation where they would need access to an emergency payment arising again, and to remove the need for tenants to make a separate application for the grant. There would obviously be an eligibility test, the details of which I'm again happy to go into and answer, but many low-income households in the PRS would face significant affordability issues as a result of debt. For this reason, people will be eligible to access the grant support to cover costs, even if the support of the cost is not available in the form of a loan or through discretionary support or discretionary housing payment. The maximum, the cost under the Independent Welfare Mitigations Review was at $2,868,000. So we recommend that a total of $3 million be set aside to supply the grant and operationalise it. The establishment of this aligns with the current policy direction of the executive in moving towards a place of homeless prevention, particularly for the most vulnerable of private tenants. It aligns with the homelessness strategy, and it aligns with the current housing priority under the draft programme for government. And in the context of the current wider discussion about poverty, we cannot hope to address poverty unless we make housing affordable and provide affordable housing for people. We all know the challenges we face to the current stock, water infrastructure holding developments up, but we can't simply tell private tenants that we know what we have to do, but you're going to have to wait until we overcome the infrastructure barriers before we can make housing affordable. Introducing the Financial Inclusion Service would, for those most vulnerable tenants, provide a lifeline which could mean the difference between maintaining their tenancy and having a home or becoming homeless. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're happy to take any questions.
Okay, well, thank you for that. And I suppose just in recognition of the fact that it is a coalition and there are many different angles to that, the opening remarks have been quite comprehensive there. If I could ask members if they know who they wish to direct their question to, please do so. If that's not immediately clear, if one member of the panel could pick up and give the substantive answer. If anybody needs to come in with a wee bit of additional, so be it. But if I could just ask that we try to focus it in that regard. And thank you for all of that, and important and in ways worrying but vital information, I have to say, in terms of informing our work and the department's work and all of that. So can I ask, just in relation to the current mitigations themselves which are in question, the Minister has not yet secured executive agreement for extending the mitigations, although we understand that is in progressing. Are you confident that he can secure all the appropriate approvals before the deadline?
I'm happy to start off, and then if any of my colleagues like to jump in. What we want to see is we want to see these extended on an indefinite basis. And I think, for instance, we are certainly concerned if it's only maybe extended for a year. For instance, we will be back here again, briefing yourselves and providing briefings on, again, the need to extend this again. So this is what we want to see. We want to see it indefinitely. The social sector size criteria, so the bedroom tax, was extended on an indefinite basis following campaigning by the coalition. So that is something we are going to be continuing to press for. I think do any of my colleagues want to come in, just as we haven't seen these proposals yet.
Yeah, well, I would feel probably they do have everything in place because the mitigation packages have been in place for quite a while. Obviously, I'm keen that, you know, they would add to the mitigation package, in particular the the social size criteria sector has been dealt with, but the 2-child limit. So we're now at Christmas 2024, the clock is ticking, and we at the Law Centre have said that we're happy to scrutinise any legislation or any mitigation documents that need check to facilitate that happening faster.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go to members then. First of all, Daniel, and then Evandy and Brian at this point. Daniel.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to each of you for being with us. I have to say, 3 exceptional organisations that do great work, and our offices heavily rely on them all on a daily basis for support, advice and guidance, and I just want to say thank you for that, and to your teams as well. In relation to universal credit, if the 5-week wait on universal credit was removed, what would the immediate practical benefits be, and who would gain most from that change? I know the answer is quite obvious. And how would they benefit? And do you have any idea how much this would cost to implement, to bring that forward? Any one of you for that one?
Yeah. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be your figures person. However, I can say the most vulnerable people in society are the people that are having those interactions with paramilitary lending. We cannot ascertain statistics because of the indiscretions that they use, and also it takes a lot for somebody to be able to be honest, to say that they're in trouble. Usually it's at the far end of the scale. However, every single person who is either transferred in from legacy welfare or a change of circumstances or in universal credit, by their very nature have to have less than £16,000 in their savings to be eligible for universal credit. So anything that we can do to mitigate against that will mean that they're not starting that journey from a mental health perspective, really stressed, really worried, but also they won't start in debt. We want to ask if it's possible whether the committee can see the breakdown of people that use contingency fund already and who's using advance payment loans, because this is something that we should be exploring. It's already something that can help with finance, and not enough people are availing of it. I don't know if any of my colleagues want to add on to that.
Yeah, I suppose I want to just maybe be specific and give a live example. I worked for Macmillan Benefit Service for many years, and obviously that is a change of circumstance situation. Fiona knows that when people are bereaved or the domestic violence issues, but me personally, having seen someone, you know, I've worked in Craigavon Area Hospital, someone's had a cancer diagnosis, they're working, they've had all the balls in the air, you know, life is going along, they don't have a contingency, don't have much money, and they will be eligible for universal credit. But basically their salary is gone down to SSP, and then to be told that you have a 5-week wait period to avail of universal credit, unless you're terminally ill, then you don't have to wait 5 weeks. But immediately your household is thrown into poverty and debt and fear on top of already an ill health situation that is catastrophic to the whole family. And that brings in my point about the 2-child limit. If this family has 4 children, oh, and by the way, we can only pay for 2 children.
I think that's with our 3 kiosks as a whole, if they were all addressed. For instance, in relation to your question, if we address the 5-week wait, it's going to benefit the whole of society. And whenever we're looking at costs, following from what Fiona said, I'm not an economist, but the cost of doing nothing is too high. It's going to push people further into poverty. It's going to lead to higher deprivation, destitution, and we can't simply afford to not do anything to help those who need it.
A week is too long. 5 weeks is a punishment, and it. I'm finding, particularly as we're going through the transition now, where my office is assisting a huge number of people through the process, but there's a very noticeable level of anxiety. People want to leave this as long as humanly possible because they're so terrified that they're going to be left without a means to survive or live for a 5-week period. And I know that there's, in some instances, they advance and everything else, but again, that's not without its complications and considerable issues. Even in the last few days, we've assisted quite a number of people with mental health issues that are transitioning over to universal credit, and the 5-week thing is horrendous for them. They just want to resist at every possible level. So I just don't understand the need for it, and why can we not just avoid that? So what conversations have you had with the department directly in relation to that, and how can they justify 5 weeks in your opinion?
So unfortunately, because it's coming from Department of Work and Pensions, it's probably similar to yourselves. I know you had a quite level of detail of finances with the budget. They're just saying about costing. So whilst we don't have the cost today, it's certainly something we can provide the committee, how much it would cost up front and how much it would cost to mitigate and the benefits of that. That's the problem we're having now. Something that we would love for the committee and eventually the NI executive to endorse is the Guarantee Our Essentials, where we go to Westminster and we say that every single person has enough income to guarantee that they can have a minimum level of enjoyment, not just existence. Now what that would mean is that would stop the 5-week and it would also incur a lift into universal credit payments. This can be mitigated against. The drawback we get from the department is because they can't go into HMRC's systems, that it's the IT system and the infrastructure that actually costs more than the mitigation itself, and that's something we'd like to work with you going forward.
Okay, thank you, Daniel. Andy?
Thanks, Chair. And maybe just picking up on UC again, and in particular the contingency fund, and something that I've repeatedly seen, and on the last committee of which I was a member, it was something we repeatedly raised, and you may be aware of that, and indeed we were deeply concerned by the number of people accessing the contingency fund. Have you seen any change? Because the department would tell us that they've made changes as to how they notify people of the availability of the contingency fund, but I'm not convinced that that is actually cutting through. Are you seeing that as a difference?
I'll deal with that, since probably I'm the one who's most on the front line, so to speak, especially from my Macmillan background and advice background. Basically, the department do say that, and they say, oh, we tell everybody at the Jobs and Benefits Office that this is available, and the go-to is there will be a message in your journal to say, oh, you can avail of this. The people that are moving, and Daniel, you'll see this, the people that are moving over to universal credit from legacy benefits they've been on for many years, accessing a whole new online benefit where they have to find their journal online. I would love to, actually, the panel here, to be able to have a look at a universal credit application and your statement and see the amount of information that then they're bombarded with. It's just all words to some people. It's not something that they're going to pick out between and carefully go through, unless an advisor, they come to independent advice and say, someone like yourself, this is here, but you're not capturing everybody. So I do think that it needs to be promoted more. And we have also said in the Cliff Edge that it needs to be renamed Universal Credit Contingency Fund Grant. I struggle to remember the name of it, so that needs to be New Claim Grant, and it needs to be advertised in the same way that there was a budget to advertise managed migration and the move to UC and all the fabulous graphics. Just add in, and you can get a new claim grant.
Very
No.
quickly. Oh, sorry, Andy.
Go ahead, sorry.
No, just very quickly, we know that there was a levy from Westminster that means that there's going to be an injection of about 1.3 million for debt advice. The Minister announced that last week. We want to say early intervention and prevention is what the key use of that money should be, because the problem is over 50% of people that use food banks have never received that independent advice. If you don't know it's there, you won't apply for it. Thank you. Sorry.
And it is having,
Go ahead.
I was going to say, it is having things accessible to those who need it, and it's, for instance, making the language, for instance, legislation, the legal jargon that's used around different words and phrasing, it's having it accessible. So if someone is sitting in their home at night and they don't have access to an advisor, they maybe don't have anyone who can help them understand that, it's making it accessible for them to know how to work through an application, who to contact the next morning whenever they need to, or as soon as they can, and having all of that in place, so people can access these funds when they need it. They can work through the universal credit applications with help, and also they can access advice services too, and they know where to go to get that support.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I would totally agree. The way UC is set up and the information flow is completely different to what the departments often refer to as the legacy system. You know, income support, JSA, ESA, etc. And then they would have got them either a telephone call or a letter, and they could engage with advisors. Have you any views, and certainly I have my own, but interested to hear from yourselves as to how the department promotes the advance payment in contrast to the contingency fund?
Yes. Basically, that's I have found in my experience, and that's why the breakdown, Fiona, is a good thing to ask. What is the breakdown between the advance payments and the contingency fund grant? But sometimes people get to me and they've already applied for an advance payment, and then they're not eligible for a contingency fund grant because they've got some money in the bank. But what they don't realise is that they're going to be paying that back every month for quite a long time. So the problem is that, yes, the advance payment is offered, and then people, they need a lifeline, they need some money in the bank, they need to go to Tesco's and buy their food, so they will take that advance payment. Yeah. But actually sometimes that will mean they're not eligible for the grant at that point.
Yeah, and just on that, in terms of the advance payment, and I, as you'd highlighted, have seen the Universal Credit Journal and the portal, and have seen the amount of information with constituents, so I'm very familiar with it. And without adding all the other complexities in that people may be experiencing or dealing with in their lives, it's challenging enough to deal with. But what's stands out to me is the advance payment is prominent, and indeed we put forward to the department previously around them trying to get some sort of dedicated resource within the UC portal for the contingency fund, and they'd highlight around DWP and bespoke changes. Would you agree, or what would your views be in terms of the department taking forward some Northern Ireland specific initiative around promoting the contingency fund? Do you feel what they're doing currently is enough?
I think by the very nature that people are using advance payments over a grant that's non-repayable shows that it's not. And we, I don't want to discredit the department. I think they're working, but there is a missing link, and whether that is assessing what their advisors are saying, as you say, the prominence of what. Also the understanding, advance payment, I understand that. Do I understand what a contingency fund is? No, I don't. So even as you say, change of circumstances or new application grants, something so simple, and have that highlighted that it's non-repayable, that this is a grant you don't have to pay back, and an advance payment is something you have to pay back. You would see the statistics change, I think.
And no, I certainly wouldn't be asking to discredit the department. And but what I would say is, given that we have been raising this with them, for many years, and given that we're here back again discussing the same issue, and that the same number of people are having problems, would tell me that the department haven't fully taken on board the advice that's being given by the experts and those working on the cold face. So there is a particular problem, and we don't need to discredit them in that regard. The information stands for itself. In terms of in the presentation, and I'm not 100% who had made the reference, but you'd referenced mistakes made in terms of dealing with UC applications, etc. Can you maybe give a flavour as to what those mistakes are? Indeed, I've seen some myself, and I've highlighted, and we've seen mistakes with welfare supplementary payments that we're hopefully now going to see getting changed in relation to the social sector size criteria, and I know Stephen had spoken to you about that as well in the past.
Yes, I've been dealing with managed migration and been delivering master classes on it for the advice sector, in fact, and we are seeing a lot of mistakes. I know that the department is under immense pressure in terms of staffing and probably training, but it's a DWP system that doesn't necessarily fit Northern Ireland. So I think that there should be an advertising campaign, just to go back to the contingency fund first before I deal with the mistakes, that there should be some sort of advertising campaign, number one, to make people aware it's a thing, but number two, most people have to go to the Jobs and Benefits Office to verify their ID. That is the perfect time to identify people at that point. So really, we probably need numbers of, is that in the format of that first initial interview? Because if people know at that point and advised to get independent advice in the advice sector, they will get it. And actually the department did put discretionary support online during the pandemic, and it's actually very good. It's more accessible, because we did used to have to deal with the issues with the telephone line and not being able to get through. But at least if you can get independent advice and get online, you can apply for it online, and then someone rings you back. And you've had time to actually calm and think, right, these are all my outgoings, these are all, this is my income, this is what I need. So it's actually going to be a better application for discretionary support, because you can apply for the grant for the 5-week waiting and anything else that you need. Yeah. Now, in terms of mistakes, there will not be enough time here today for me to go through the examples. I'm looking at you, Daniel. In your offices, I have no doubt that you are saying, I have not opened up a universal credit claim without seeing a mistake in it.
Okay.
So that's where we're at.
Yeah, and maybe you want to follow up with us in writing in that regard, and to give a flavour for that, because that is obviously deeply concerning. As I suppose, two final questions, Chair. I'll probably have a whole range more, but I'll leave it at the two final and let colleagues come in. In terms of, it seems common sense to me that we would change the name of the contingency fund to something like the new Universal Credit, new application fund. In the past, I've seen the department, obviously, and rightly so, highlighting the likes of the Make the Call scheme. Are you aware of anything they're doing in relation to the contingency fund? And maybe it is getting lost in translation in terms of it being highlighted as the contingency fund, but is it being highlighted in any letters that are going out to people, especially around the managed migration? Or have you seen anything recently, social media or any advertisements that the department's doing around the contingency fund? And I'm sorry to labour the point on that, but I think it is important, because especially with the 5-week wait.
Anything else? Will I deal with that? No. Yeah, okay. Yes, I mean, it is in letters. And Make the Call, again, it's a department where it's under pressure, and it depends who you speak to, Make the Call. But Make the Call is the department, it's not the independent advice sector. Mm-hmm. So yes, they can demonstrate it, but again, we'd probably need to see, is there a script that they're using where that should be just the first thing that you say, and say, are you aware of this? But the issues are, as I said before, with managed migration and this fast-paced rollout to universal credit. This is much faster than we were first advised. So there are people moving, very vulnerable people moving from legacy benefits who've been carers and on income support for years and been caring for really sick people and with their own disabilities, to be bombarded with words like the contingency fund and make a claim for universal credit. It's difficult for them, so it needs to be more clear. I think more work needs to be done around it.
Absolutely. And finally, Chair, how would you sum up universal credit in contrast to the legacy system?
I can start and then pass over. Just in terms of social security as a system in general, it is so complex and it is so tricky, and it can be so difficult to understand and wade your way through all of the different legislation, the different policies, all of the language around it. And what I think needs to be really clear is definitely the communications that come forward from it. Do again, reiterate my point from earlier, make it really accessible. we need to have, these policies that are in place that are going to be accessible for people to access them. And all of our, for instance, with all of our key asks, they're all research based, they're all evidence, they're all based on evidence. And if we have, for instance, these policies in place with simpler language that is easy to understand, it's much clearer, we'll be able to see people go through that journey a lot easier. I'll pass over to Louise, who would deal with that.
I think that Andy, again, they've allowed me to be here today, but I would, you're lucky I'm on a timer. Basically, the legacy benefit system was complicated, there's no doubt about it. But there was something more human about it in our own offices, in the Department for Communities, and the relationships that we had, and how it worked. And it was people sent letters and they were able to call up. And the Jobs and Benefits Office, we did have the pandemic thrown into the middle of it. And I have to say, Universal Credit was amazing at that time to get people money who needed it, who'd never been part of the legacy benefit system. However, we are where we are now with Universal Credit. And unfortunately, what we're probably finding a lot, and you're finding in your constituencies, I've no doubt, is that computer says no. And the flexibilities that there were with the legacy benefit system is not there with Universal Credit, because we're dealing with an IT situation that is not fit for purpose, possibly for Northern Ireland. And furthermore, with Universal Credit, there's a lack of staff and training. There are those issues as well. And, so people are maybe getting through to the helpline, but not maybe getting the correct advice. And that's the issue. And have actually had some misadvice, and these are some of the things that we will be sharing with you, the mistakes, in briefing.
I think what you said in your constituency, Andy, and also Daniel alluded to earlier, these people, if they didn't have mental ill health before this process, the amount that compounds. So you're dealing with very vulnerable people who are just trying to keep mostly hidden from their children. So it doesn't have the compassion, and this is part of welfare reform of over 10 years now, of a Tory-led initiative. And whilst I think some of our mitigation we should be very proud of, I think we have to continue the free asks. And we are from over 100 organisations. We come together with 3 specific asks, and they are not a wish list, but we believe if we continue to complete these free asks, to change the tide on those systems, you will see more and more children out of poverty and families being able just to enjoy life rather than survive it.
Okay, folks, we are coming under a bit of pressure time-wise and all hugely important issues, but we'll have to move on to Brian.
Yep. Thank you for your paper, which is well presented, and for your attendance today. So just want to ask, first of all, on the contingency fund, in your paper you talk about interpreting the guidance more widely. What are the criteria and restrictions on the fund? I think you mentioned there about if you have savings, can that be used for a refusal, or are there criteria, or if somebody asks for it, do they get it?
Oh no, it's means tested, absolutely, 100% means tested.
Even though it's a loan?
No, there's 2 parts to the contingency fund. There's a grant, and then if you don't get the grant, then they will offer you a loan.
Right, if you don't meet the criteria?
If you don't meet the criteria, yeah. And basically, to avail of the grant, you pretty much have to have nothing. Zero. Would you? I'm sure Andy and Daniel would agree with me on that. You have to have 0 in your bank to get a grant. So it is reaching the people that do not have anything, that cannot go to the shop. I mean, going back to my Macmillan experience, when people had to wait the 5 weeks, during that time I would have assisted referrals to food banks, referrals to Salvation Army, referrals to all the charities and all the organisations that we represent here today. We would have been asked, how can you help to keep this family afloat until they get their first universal credit payment? So not everybody gets the grant. It is very much means tested, and you literally have to have nothing.
Excuse me, sorry. Similarly, there's quite invasive questioning. Now we have to understand, but People are adults, they have the capacity to make good and bad choices, but if you have any online reference in your bank details to gambling, to any use of alcohol, then that can be detrimentally put against you. So it doesn't take into consideration the nuances of that relationship. Whilst we know people are very vulnerable to addiction and gambling, that's almost like a red flag into not receiving the grant on a very strict basis. So we do have to say it's invasive, that people feel very traumatised after the line of questioning, but once they receive the grant, it's actually delivered very efficiently.
Right. And we talk about increase the budget. So have you experienced of cases where the funding runs out during the year and people are refusing that basis, or what does that mean by increase the budget? Do you mean to increase the amount, or are there cases where the fund runs out because it's discretionary?
Well, it definitely happened with discretionary housing payment. That, I mean, there was the fund ran out mid-year. Discretionary support, I don't have the figures personally on that, but we can get that for you. But from a practical basis, definitely it's tighter to get as the budget runs out for the year. Yes.
And in terms of the housing element, your third ask, again, and you highlight how private sector rentals are going up fast. 8.5% you have in your paper there in a year. Can you just clarify the local housing allowance and the discretionary housing payments? Have they increased? Have they kept pace with that? I mean, I'd be familiar with people who get the discretionary payment, but it's limited to 2 years. That's still the case. And then they're in crisis because the landlord's saying either pay up or I'm going to terminate your tenancy. But are the amounts paid from government, are they increasing? How are they increasing?
So the local housing allowance was frozen between 2020 and 2024. So the rate that had been set in 2020 didn't change until April of this year. Now, during that time, Northern Ireland had seen unprecedented rent price inflation, and it hadn't been realigned to meet that. So for 4 years, people were, from what's it's theoretically supposed to cover the bottom 30% of rents in a broad rental market area, it was covering nowhere near that. So people's shortfalls were getting larger and larger. Thankfully, it was realigned in April 24 of this year. But in our experience, tenants don't actually see the benefit of that. Coming through to housing rights advice line specifically, we saw a massive increase in rent rises that aligned pretty much exactly with the realignment of the local housing allowance. So the uprate went straight in the landlord's pockets rather than actually tenants seeing the benefits of it on a worrying number of occasions. We would argue at Housing Rights specifically that the local housing allowance should be operated every single year and tethered to at least the 30th percentile, preferably the 50th percentile, as it was originally conceived to be.
What was that? What did you say it should be tethered to?
The 30th percentile of rents in a broad rental market area. Originally, when it was set up, it was supposed to be 50, it was cut down to 30. But we would argue that should be tethered every single year, so people constantly see the uptick in support, which would align theoretically with the inflation in their rent. That doesn't happen. The autumn statement this year made no mention of operating the local housing allowance again. So we anticipate that it's going to be frozen for the foreseeable future. During that time, rents will continue to inflate. They're slowing down a little, but nowhere near to a reasonable degree, which we would have seen before 2020. And that's why this third ask around the financial inclusion service is really targeting those people on the precipice of their affordability issues being stretched and in real danger of homelessness, to be able to target those people and provide them with the grant that they need to cover any shortfall or to cover a temporary affordability issue. Discretionary housing payment, as you just said, there was limits put on it. I think it was August last year, and that's because it was anticipated to go over budget. we had secured a policy change in 2021, which basically meant that discretionary housing payment could have become indefinite for people who needed it. As rents increased, demand on the discretionary housing payment budget grew, and there was a policy change which made it a maximum of 2 years, and I think limited it to £20 a week maximum.
Okay. Thank you.
I'll chip in on that just because I did take a lot of calls around that time whenever that discretionary housing payment budget ended, as I'm sure Daniel did, as I'm sure Andy did, and the fear in people, it was awful about the risk of homelessness.
Mm-hmm. It's our advice experience as well that very often it was a lifeline for people to meet the rent. And when that policy change was made, people who had been on it for over 2 years by that stage had their payments immediately stopped. There was kind of no notice, no chance for people to budget for over the next couple of months to sort of meet that payment. And it was like Law Centre, we experienced a massive spike in calls. People from the private rent sector specifically worried about homelessness.
They've lost it and their rent's been up at the same time. So it's a double problem.
Okay, Brian. Yep. Ciara, go ahead.
Thank you all for coming here today and highlighting once again, particularly we're back at full circle regarding the welfare mitigations, not just even the existing ones and supporting families, but also the excellent work that was done with all of yourselves and with Les at the time with the expert working group and the 12 recommendations he made in the welfare mitigations report. We're talking about the existing when you would hope that we would have been talking about the additional welfare mitigations at this stage. So that's just the first point. I suppose the second point I want to make, and with reference to Fiona, and as you mentioned, even in my own local constituency, and I have managed a food bank for 14, 15 years, etc. I've dealt with people doing that transfer. It is the worrying trend of illegal money lenders knocking on people's doors at the mouth for Christmas, which would I be really fearful of. And I just, now when you say that, I dropped someone off at a house on Friday, went in and says, God, 3 kids, and they're currently awaiting. And I was too afraid to ask them, how long are you waiting? And they says, we're hoping his mum's maybe going to give us a loan and get it before Christmas, where we can buy the kids their Christmas toys. So I absolutely get it, where people who are totally oblivious to the language of benefits, to the language of that there is a particular fund available, unless they're made aware of it. And they wouldn't be familiar with probably welfare organisations, etc., etc. Mm-hmm. But it is it's like yourselves and the work you do, it's a responsibility for us too, to maybe to encourage and support anyone we meet, to be asking those questions, are you aware of it? And I think we just heard from our previous presentations that there is additional monies into the contingency fund, which is good in the first instance, but people need to be aware of it, that it actually exists. And then likewise, you mentioned about the 2-child benefit. I wouldn't see it as replacing, with the Better Start grant. We need both.
Yes, absolutely.
I just want to clarify that. It's about having both. Yeah. And I know that's all costed, so do you feel, from a departmental point of view and the minister's point of view, just suppose first and foremost, the stalemate where we are, we haven't seen the legislation either, and you're keen to see it, that it is like the bedroom tax, it's forever more men complete, where there isn't any timelines. That's the ambition, and is that the hope that all you as organisations are expecting to see within this legislation?
Yes.
That will be presented to the Executive Office? Yeah.
Although you'll not get it in legislation, we are hoping that there's aspirations to go beyond, as you say, the status quo. But whether we get that, but the hope is certainly that it's done the same way the bedroom tax was
indefinite.
Yeah.
That's the hope.
It's our hope. And when we look, for instance, at most people who are in receipt of the benefit cap welfare supplementary payment, it's women and it's children. All those who receive that are families with children. It's 1,370 people. And we do hope that it is indefinitely extended, because if not, the average benefit cap is about £53 a week, but For instance, over the course of the month, that adds up. Some, for instance, are going to be losing over £100 a week. And if that's only extended for a year, again, that's going to create a lot of fear, uncertainty, a lot of anxiousness as well. And over the next year, that's something then we'll have to campaign for it to be extended again. So it is our hope that it is going to be an indefinite extension.
And just secondly, regarding, we're well aware, and the Minister has made clear that the anti-poverty strategy should be by the end of January presented, and we did have a presentation last week on the current work that's ongoing. I'm assuming that you're assuming that the proposals brought forward regarding the 12 welfare mitigation supporting not only families but also our vital support to our carers or to our young people that are carers with people with disability. Are you hoping that they are included within an anti-poverty strategy moving forward?
Absolutely, yes. I'll let the colleagues
as we represent over 100 organisations, we have a lot of different voices, so much experience, a lot of different wealth and knowledge. And to fully address poverty, we did respond to the Programme for Government Consultation where we called for the eradication of poverty to be an additional priority. There's so much that we can't address if we don't tackle poverty first and if we don't make that a priority. We have also within that, we did call for that commitment to be made, but also as well with it to be short-term, long-term goals. We wanted targets and commitments within that for that anti-poverty strategy. And we did ask for our key 3 asks to be included as specific actions to make sure that the eradication of poverty is prioritised.
Can I have just one more? I'd like to go to yourself, Stephen, regarding the private rented sector, where I particularly see the greatest need and without access to support. And we've heard on a continuous basis regarding even the potential of getting grants to support people in private rented accommodation. It's quite a small bid, £3 million that was requested to have a financial inclusion service, a small grant to support the services. Could you just kind of give us a feel for what would be the impact of that £3 million investment into a financial inclusion service for those currently in the private rented sector that need support and who are struggling? And I know I would agree with you, we should be going to the 50% percentage when it comes to disadvantage for their housing allowance. We are, as a committee, and I know we are regularly writing to the Treasury because we don't want to see a further freeze, which could happen again with the British government. But so it's probably just a reminder for ourselves that we need to continue to be lobbying and writing to the British Treasury and the British government in relation to, we don't want to see a freeze on the local housing allowance in the first instance, but we should be lobbying and pushing for the 50%. But I'd love to just hear more about the impact you would see just that £3 million investment, what it could actually do for the private rented sector and those that are currently vulnerable and struggling to pay their rent, never mind to have the basic guarantee of food on the table and heat.
Yeah, well, quite simply, you could save families from homelessness. So we estimate that the uptake of the grant would be around 2,399 families a year. That's like 2,400 families who you're effectively saving from homelessness, and the impact that has on them, the child's education, mental health, and that's before you even get to the cost of the public purse that a family going into homelessness actually incurs. So you're seeing an investment which in the long run could effectively save the public purse money for a relatively small bid that's able to reach 2,399 people over the course of a year. The private rented sector at the minute and the affordability difficulties that people are seeing in it is probably the most extreme that I've seen. I mean, I've only been in the housing sector for a short time, but even looking back into the past and the previous numbers, rent has never been rising so fast. It's never been rising so extreme, the extreme levels it is at the minute. Like it's 8% at the minute, but this is the first time in a while it's came below double figures. There's been no sort of increase in protection other than the realignment of the local housing allowance in April of this year. But even that, we have doubts about the benefits of it. Of tenants actually seeing the benefits of it, as there's no limit here in terms of a tenant protection that a landlord can't up the rent. wages have stagnated, benefits haven't increased. So if you're talking about just direct impact, you're talking around the people who are most vulnerable, most in danger of becoming homeless, having an effective lifeline when all other avenues have failed, to be able to keep a roof over their heads and avoid having to go to the House Executive and present as homeless.
Well, thank you.
Okay, listen, thank you. Some really important issues there. I know this was principally around the issue of the current mitigations, and we are conscious there are wheels turning in relation to that. We will, as a committee, continue to keep our eye on that and continue to work our way through that. And it is reflective of the concern we've had that we've brought it to a motion, and we'll continue to do that. I have to say, just in relation to using as an example, even just the 5-week wait, it is, in my opinion, and always has been, cruel, totally counterproductive, and even counterintuitive that you would, when someone comes to that point of crisis, that you would then put in, so that speaks to it being an ideological measure and impact. I suppose there is little in the way of comfort since the Tory government has been replaced by the Labour government to indicate that there's a change of mindset around that austerity, and that's of huge concern. And I think one the committee will need to look at, because addressing all of these things, including the 2-child limit and all of those, and I note what Scotland has done as well. I do note that they're saying we are determined to do something about it so there's more information to come there. But substantially, what we need to see is the British government funding those measures, and particularly here we're in a very tight financial situation, so I think there's a lot of work to do across a lot of fronts on relation to this, but it's hugely important work. I want to thank you all for giving us your time and insights and perspectives. Those are of great value to the committee as we work forward, and I've no doubt we'll be in touch with you again. Thank you for your paper, and thank you for coming today, and we'll continue our deliberations on this issue as we go forward. Correspondence mai agah.
Thank you. And we'll be in touch as well with the supplementary information we mentioned during as well.
Thank you, and we'll probably be seeking some follow-ups as well, so thank you for that.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, members, so just let's pull together any other points then that arising out of that we need any further actions, please. So,
was a request to ask for greater awareness around that grant would be a good starting point.
Yeah, the breakdown, and I've just checked with the clerk. Have we received back specific information around the breakdown of advance payments versus contingency? That was one of the issues raised there. I wasn't clear if we have the full information. I know we've written to the department on a number of occasions on these issues generally, and we have some information back, but I'm not aware of the breakdown between how many people are going for advance payment versus
something we got in the last committee mandate. I don't recall receiving it this time around.
I don't recall either.
We definitely asked for it in the last one.
I think we should look for an update, seek an update on that issue.
They've all pointed to a lack of awareness around the grant. There's more of a clear understanding of this advance, so obviously it's been pushed more somewhere. Do we know how much the grant's worth, or is it at their discretion as to what that is allocated to?
I suppose it would be useful to get the average or the range that is provided. I think it's based on what their existing income would have been. Right. But what concerns me is part of the eligibility criteria is if back in January those that are most in need would be looking for support, and we all know start of the year. If last year I needed support and I got a grant, and then come the end of the year I was transferring over my 5-week, I can't apply for a contingency because you can only have one in a year. So that's concerning as well. But it's known as that an issue? I don't know. Because you would assume the people that are most vulnerable are the ones that need the contingency, whether they're on the legacy benefits or whether they're transferring to universal credit. So that's one of the criteria that I would be concerned about.
Don't have a quorum just at the minute.
Yeah. I wonder are we expecting Andy back, or is he?
He took his computer, so I couldn't just
Okay, so we'll have to leave that and.
So Andy was here when we agreed just to ask for the differential information with regard to advance payments.
Yeah.
And
that would be good to know.
I think we could agree that one if members are agreeable.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, can I just note about the local housing allowance about for it keeping pace with increases, but whether I have to raise that again, just when I asked about that. What are the plans going forward for that?
We agreed at previous meetings a few months back that we would regularly keep the pressure on. So that was a previous agreement made that we would keep the pressure on the British government.
Yeah,
and write to them regularly. I think a
3 monthly.
A 3 monthly in relation to it, regarding any potential freeze.
I can take a look at that.
So that's an agreed action. So we don't need Andy.
Right.
We could do that again.
Okay, thank you. So, in terms of forward work programme, Clerk, can I just check? Can we agree the forward work programme, or how do we?
Just note it.
Just note the members. Yeah. Note the forward work programme.
Could I just ask then about next week? So, Clooney Hall.
Yeah.
So, what time? I presume we might get some information and sent out, will we? Yeah.
We'll get a pack sent out on Monday,
Right.
and just allow enough time to identify parking, because there's limited enough parking.
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, I have meetings. I have a meeting at 2:15 back in Belfast here. So anyway, I'd like to get back in time for that. So.
Oh God, what's not.
But we'd be finishing.
I have to come here for PAC at 2 as well.
Right.
So.
So we'd be finishing by 12:30, or the latest, or.
Probably would need to be. Yeah.
I think the PAC to Clooney Hall next week will be handier for
Would be handier. That would be handier indeed.
Good.
Okay. So just then, in terms of any other business members, we sent an email in relation to
Yeah, there's been an amendment proposed to the committee motion. I've just got knowledge while we've been in meetings, so we'll follow that up with an email.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, members.
Taking views on that. We may need to meet if committee wants to take a position on that proposed amendment
Yeah.
prior to the debate.
We'll give members a chance to have a look at it. Yeah. So that email will follow, members, and move into agenda item 13, date, time and location of next meeting. Our next meeting will be at 10 a.m. on Thursday, 12th December in Clooney Hall in Derry on 12th December. Thank you. The meeting is now adjourned, and take us out of public session, please.
Committee Room 29, Sound.